Good evening to you, wherever you are, and welcome to this episode of Deep Space Wine. As you might have guessed from the name, we review each episode of Deep Space Nine in order while drinking wine, because it rhymes with nine. We are intellectuals. I'm Kat, and I'm watching Deep Space Nine for the very first time at a rate of one episode a fortnight. And yes, it is agony to watch such a good show so slowly. And my good friend Tim has been familiar with the show since it first aired in the 1990s. Today we will be covering episode 16 or 17 if you count Emissary's 2 episodes, which I think the internet does, The Forsaken, which was first aired in broadcast syndication on May the 24th, 1993. This episode was written by Don Dunaway and Michael Piller, who was the showrunner of The Next Generation from mid-season 3, and apparently his innovation for the show was to make it more character-focused and less Monster of the Week. And I think that shows a lot in this episode. In terms of content warning this week, there is one scene in the episode where one character sexually harasses another. She touches his chest over his uniform. There's no other non-consensual touching. Nobody suffers any lasting harm afterwards, and the two characters have reconciled by the end of the episode. There is one anecdote told about an historic instance of sexual harassment, which we will be discussing. And there's an instance over a few scenes of people endangered by a fire in a corridor in which no one dies. And this week, Tim will be giving us our plot summary of the episode. Take it away, Tim.
Goodness me. Oh, in an episode that it revolves around technical problems on the station, this feels so apt. So our Twitch software indicates that I am broadcasting my sound now, so I am so sorry, everyone. And, you know, kudos to Captain Cat there for stepping up and single-handedly piloting the whole podcast themselves. I am eternally grateful for you stepping in there.
I can burble for a little bit, but I'm very grateful that your voice is on here as well. We couldn't have had 2 hours of just me.
Yes. Well, thank you. Nonetheless, you stepped up to the plate marvellously, so thank you so much for doing that, Cat. So, yes, so here we are finally, all together. And I think you were very... I don't want to interrupt your flow, actually, because what I wanted was to get your impressions of the episode from the top. So please, you know, carry on. You were describing how it's I think it's a 3-cylinder.
It's trifecta, yeah. I think it's a bit uneven, to be honest. I quite like Bashir and the ambassadors, although I think every plot in this episode has me questioning Sisko's decision-making. But I enjoy the dynamic between Bashir and the ambassadors. There's good fun there. Lwaxana and Odo, there is one scene which I was very dubious about when first watching it. She's very badly behaved, but as we'll discuss later, I think it fits with 90s sensibilities better than it does with today's. And they ultimately have a really wonderful scene together throughout this episode, so I'm looking forward to discussing that. But the thing about the puppy, it doesn't work for me.
Okay.
I think it's not high concept enough. They needed some more visual stuff in there just to make it stand out a bit more, because what we end up with is O'Brien telling everyone what's happening a lot in ops.
Yes.
And it's just not very interesting.
I think you make a very good point, because if we did every Star Trek episode with them pushing buttons on a console, there would be nothing else in the show. So I definitely take your point there. I definitely found this to be an uneven episode with some very high spots and some just quite thin spots, so I'm very glad we seem to be on the same frequency there.
Let's see if we loved and hated different bits.
Right, I'll kick us off then. But please do immediately chip in anywhere where I've skipped slightly ahead. Straight off, we get a station log, which we love to hear, and a nice difference from the captain's log of Picard's Enterprise. And he is saying that Deep Space Nine is playing a host to an ambassadorial party from the Federation, from his government, you know, not Starfleet, the government, to which Starfleet responds. They are here on a fact-finding mission to the wormhole. Not through the wormhole, to the wormhole, which is interesting, but I can imagine after Kaya Packer, they're reluctant to send more VIPs through where horrible things will happen.
We've killed off the main Bajoran, let's get rid of the rest of them.
Okay, no. So they're being a bit cautious. But straight off, Sisko's attitude is, I need an officer to take them off my hands. I don't want to be babysitting VIPs. Which, kind of flies a little bit in the face, I think, of what the Federation and what Starfleet is meant to be. I thought Starfleet was meant to be a diplomatic agency, as well
And
as, spaceships looking at weird stuff and occasionally fighting. They're meant to be diplomats. So why would you be...
And generally speaking, Sisko is very good at being a diplomat. He sits in on difficult conversations between different cultures. So having to show some people around the station for a bit doesn't seem quite so hard.
Yeah. It's like he takes ambassadors from other species very seriously, but his own ambassadors, Federation ambassadors, are, oh, those guys, oh, whatever.
Maybe that's why he was so willing to take on the commission, just anything to get as far away as possible from the rest of the Federation.
I think
that's fine. Just get me away from
away from Earth. Well, his previous job was on Mars, so yeah, that's as close as Earth as you can get without actually being on the moon. So I don't blame him.
I'll just list the ambassadors that we have.
Please, because I missed their details.
We've got Taxco, who's an Arbazan ambassador. Vidosia, who is Bolian, who is blue with a kind of ridge down in the front of his face. And we have Lojal, who is a Vulcan. Love a good Vulcan.
Marvellous, thank you. Bolians and Vulcans we're very familiar with. Bolians were introduced and seen a fair bit in TNG. Mr. Mott the Barber, the Enterprise D, was a Bolian. And I missed the first.
Arbazan. She wasn't especially visually distinct, to be honest. She looked a little like a Bajoran with slightly fancier hair.
Yes. I think that was possibly a bit of a hurried introduction of some prosthetics to the face, but not enough to distinguish her, sadly. But never mind. So we have these three ambassadors, and of course, as with almost every episode, it's starting in the bar because Deep Space Nine has no diplomatic facilities, apparently. I can understand that. They are on a form of mining and orbital station.
Did they never hold meetings anywhere except the bar when it was run by the Cardassians? I don't picture them as being big drinkers somehow.
Well, I mean, I do know, and it's no spoiler to say that later on they will get a room for this kind of thing. Similar to the observation lounge on the D, it's another room where they can go, and it's not Sisko's office or ops or the bar. So it will come in time, but yes, right now they are flagging up that Deep Space Nine has no diplomatic facilities. No, the Indoor Cat. Quark is not diplomatic. Quark is acquisitive. And if diplomacy will get him what he wants, he will be diplomatic. But let's not paint it as anything more than it is.
But it does give lots of opportunities for Quark to get involved when it's in the bar, which when you've got someone like Armin Shimmerman on your hands,
you do.
It's always a good thing.
You want him. He adds only glamour and glitter to every scene he's in. So I will take that, absolutely. And the first thing we get is an impression of the ambassadors, who are also complaining that there are no ambassadorial quarters. The Arbalian ambassador says her quarters are not big enough, and Bashir explains, because Bashir is obviously naturally, as the most junior officer on staff, he is the host of the ambassadors. He has explained that there are no bigger quarters. All the guest quarters are the same, and she says, what about the crew quarters? Well, they're all occupied. She said, well, then why don't I get one of them? Somebody could leave, somebody like you. And I was just like, this is the worst diplomacy I've ever heard.
She's absolutely dreadful. In fact, one of the other ambassadors steps in on Bashir's behalf and says she was complaining about this all the way here. And I think they chunter among each other for a little while. But of all of the crew on board Deep Space Nine, why Bashir? Dax is the obvious choice. She doesn't have that much to do except for asking O'Brien questions in this episode.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason is because Bashir is funniest. Because it's entertaining watching the young horny doctor who always puts his foot in it with a group of ambassadors.
I think in universe as well, and I've made notes on this later, but I think it's a bit of a hazing ritual. Sisko talks about how he
describes it as such, but that's not how you conduct diplomatic relations.
It really isn't.
You don't just throw the least qualified member of staff at them and hope that it goes well.
Absolutely not.
Sisko's question making in this episode is extremely decision making is extremely questionable. I'm distressed on behalf of Bashir. He shouldn't have been put in that situation.
I would absolutely agree. I think the whole thing is being played for laughs because all the diplomats have no diplomacy. They all hate each other. They hate Bashir. They hate the station. They have no restraint, no ability to communicate their problems, constructively. The whole thing has to be just taken as a farce that makes no in-universe sense, and we are literally just seeing it for the laughs. which is a bumpy start to this episode.
It just suggests that nobody really knows what they're doing.
I think that's a fair observation. Yeah, I do.
But yeah, the ambassadors kind of blame each other for things for a while.
Yes.
Taxco responds to the complaint from Vadosia by saying that he was bothering the captain with suggestions on how to run his ship. Vadosia is saying that the captain welcomed his suggestions, as will Sisko, if they get to spend any time with him.
Mm-hmm.
And Bashir's kind of making it up as he goes along and says that Commander Sisko is extremely busy with the recalibration sweep. It's a sweeping recalibration of all systems, and unfortunately the Vulcan ambassador is really fascinated by this and wants to come along and see it. And Bashir then suggests that they might enjoy a holosuite, and the Arbazan ambassador is hugely offended by this because in this universe, suddenly everybody knows that the holosuites are for sex. Meanwhile, you've still got the next generation ploughing along, a few, who knows how many light years away, happily using the holosuite for mild adventure.
Yes.
No idea that everyone else knows it's for porn.
Yes.
I just love the universal agreement that it's for shagging.
This is it. Yeah, 100%. I think the line "disgusting Ferengi sex programs" arose, and I immediately made a note that "disgusting Ferengi sex programs" was a short-lived Andorian punk band of the 23rd century, because it just worked so well as a band name for me. So I thoroughly enjoyed "disgusting Ferengi sex programs."
Oh my god, I want a T-shirt with that in metal font.
If we ever do merch, we'll have to think about that.
Along with no kink shaming on the promenade.
No kink shaming on the promenade. I love that one as well.
Anyway, they are then interrupted by Lwaxana Troi screaming,
Yes.
"Oh, it's gone! It's gone!" from across the bar. I put that Lwaxana gives really good bird-like screaming.
Yes.
She's really irrelevant.
Yeah.
And she is at the Dabo table. Her Lassenham hair brooch has gone. I think we've got a picture of Lwaxana at the Dabo table looking rather splendid. She has several outfit changes in this episode.
She does. Wonderful, big shoulders, very low cuts, that lovely bouffant pink hair. She looks fantastic. There's no denying it. She does look fantastic.
She really does. And she's just made her third straight cross. We're getting just Dabo rules being trickled in again. I think last episode they introduced the idea of a cross. This is her third straight one. But yes, she's had her brooch stolen. And she says, "I've been wigged." And I couldn't find any definition for the word wigged online, which means mugged, robbed.
Oh.
I
would refer Lieutenant Cat there in the chat if you want to consult the LCAR's memory database, and if you can find any reference to wigged in American idioms of the 20th century, I would be very curious. Because I didn't even hear her say that. Wigged.
Yeah, she says, "I've been wigged," and I'm just like, well, she's wearing a wig. Is that to draw attention to this early in the episode? I just don't know.
No, that was a new one on me. So we will task Lieutenant Cat with that one, the indoor cat, and see if they can dig anything up.
Yes. In the meantime, Quark comes up and asks what the problem is, and Bashir explains, to which Quark points out the tiny little sign above the door, which says that the establishment is not responsible for the loss of any personal items. And even Bashir is put out saying you'd have to stand on a chair to read that.
I love that. That was just so believably real. That is just something you could absolutely believe happening now, anytime. We've reached the stars, we've traveled the galaxy, and, shady establishments still have tiny signs saying, possessions at your own risk.
Exactly. And Rom isn't here in this episode. If Rom had been dealing with this, he would have been extremely deferential. He would have offered to go and find it immediately. Lwaxana would have been placated. But no, Quark is Quark. If you lose something, it's your fault.
That's exactly it.
But yes, oh yes, the next thing Lwaxana does is to grab Quark by the ear and tell him, "You are dealing with the daughter of the fifth house, holder of the sacred chalice of Reeks, heir to the holy rings of Beta Z," in a commanding voice, which she does at least once an episode, and I fucking love it. When you get the whole fucking daughter of the fifth house treatment.
Oh, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. It's her verbal catchphrase. It's her slapping down the big, impressive business card, even though I seem to recall from TNG, Deanna Troi referring to the sacred chalice of Rix as a mouldy old pot, I believe.
That's right.
I love that.
Yeah, kept in a cupboard somewhere at home.
Yeah.
Yes, a Quark that says, "Not my ear, please!"
Yes.
Lwaxana responds, "Yes, and I know where it hurt you most, you little troll. Now I want to steal now. Everyone in it strip search until you find my brooch." I just love her range. She'll play damsel in distress if she thinks that will get her what she wants. And when that doesn't work, she turns immediately to, "Right, I'm fucking in charge, bitch. Go and find it."
It's incredible. I've made a note later on that's saying that Majel Barrett slightly over emote in every scene, and it works. Lwaxana is cast iron believable. I think we've all known somebody like this or met someone like this, and she's just believable. You're right. She is acting. She's acting a certain way. She's acting coquettish, domineering, mischievous. She acts it. And then when she's actually sincere later on in the episode, it's just as believable. It's great. She's got fantastic
Absolutely.
range.
This is a really good setup for what comes later. It's big, it's over the top, and it means that when she has quiet, sincere moments, they stand out because it's so different from everything else we've seen from her. It's very nicely set up in terms of a Lwaxana episode. I think they've got it just right the way they introduce her. She explains that the brooch has been in her family for 36 generations. I don't know how long-lived, but betazoids are. But 36 generations is like immeasurable time.
That is
anyone on Earth can trace themselves back 36 whole generations. Absolutely. So I don't know if she's just bluffing here.
I suspect so, because I don't. To my knowledge, I don't think they're any more older lived than us. So yeah, that would be an absurd amount of time to go back.
But yes, Odo then arrives, and Bashir introduces the pair. Lwaxana explains that her brooch has been stolen. It was in her family 36 generations, and it's absolutely priceless. Odo says, "You're certain you were wearing it today?" And she's actually very calm, and she says, "Yes, of course I'm certain. I never use this hair without it." And I was surprised by how calm she was, because I would have expected her to stay in angry mode when someone else came along and wasn't immediately believing her and getting it back for her. But no, she's quite calm. Odo gets a really nice kind of Poirot moment here, which I don't think he's had previously.
No.
And I hope he'll get again.
I do. Actually doing some detective work, some good police work, which is just looking at the facts, assessing the situation, putting what he knows to work. It's great. Yeah, I actually enjoyed this.
It's really nice, and it's really fitting with Star Trek. It brings in bits of Star Trek lore. So he asks her, "You're Betazoid?" And she says, "Well, yes, of course." "Telepathic?" "Yes." "And you sense no guilt anywhere in this room?"
Brilliant.
And she kind of closes her eyes, concentrates, and scans her head around, and says, "No." But then she turns to look at Quark and says, "Betazoids cannot read Ferengis." And Odo says, "Quark has plenty of reason to feel guilty, but he doesn't usually have to resort to petty theft to fleece his clients." And Quark says, "Thank you."
Yeah, I love that. Quark's like, "You know what? I will take, some kind of vindication wherever I can get it." Okay, sure. All right then. Yeah, but at least I don't actively pickpocket my customers. That would be below me. It's like, okay, that's his level.
Height of honesty for a Ferengi at this point. So Odo looks around and spots someone in a dark corner, who moves to leave when he spots Odo looking at him. So Odo stops him and has him empty his pockets out. The thief is carrying a lot of objects, including a Starfleet comm badge and Lwaxana's brooch. Odo explains, "Dopterians are distant relatives of the Ferengi. It made sense that since you couldn't read Quark, you might not be able to read this charming fellow either." And yeah, I just really like that. He asked her to use her skills to find someone when they couldn't be found. He wondered why that was and figured it out. Yeah. I'm just a little surprised we haven't had that before now, because it just feels like such a neat little bit of character work that must have been fun to write.
100%. And it is good character building. It gives us finally a reason to be like, okay, Odo's actually a good cop. He's not just a good cop because he can turn into a bottle or a rat or a glass and hide and spy.
Or because he just stares at Quark until Quark does something wrong, which
or
he
that.
inevitably does.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Finally, we've actually seen the evidence that Odo is a good cop. Yeah, good at his job, I should say.
And given that some of the conversation he has later revolves around his being a shapeshifter, that is a really good point. It's nice that they brought out this aspect of his character, of him and his life now, rather than just leaning into that for the whole episode. Yeah.
There's some good detective work in the chat as well. Thank you to Lieutenant Indoor Cat, who has said on wigs, the only thing they can find was people saying wigged out or wigging out, not having been wigged, in a sense of I'm suddenly excessively confused or anxious about something that has just happened out of nowhere.
Ah, it could have been that then.
Bakery
She's
Dragon
just,
says,
"Yeah, I'm
same.
influenced. I've been wigged."
Yeah, wigged out is a phrase I've heard of. I have heard the phrase wigged out, but I do think it's very much an Americanism that's not made it into kind of like this English language that we're familiar with. Seems like a Lwaxanaism. I'll give you that. Yes, I can absolutely see that.
Yes, thank you very much for that. That does make more sense now.
Much appreciated.
And yes, Lwaxana responds to Odo's deduction by saying, "Ah, how perfectly brilliant of you," smiling at him, utterly enchanted.
There's a note in her voice when I feel like she's flicked a switch and she is Lwaxana as we've known her from the Enterprise. She is on the prowl. She has fixed her eye on a knight in shining armor, and she is interested. That's how I immediately took that change.
I'm just kind of glad she didn't latch on to Bashir, because that would have been a pairing that nobody needs to do.
Oh, wow. Okay, hey, listen, each to their own. We always say no king shaming on the promenade, but wow, yeah, I can't. A collision of two very different personalities I would not be here for.
But yes, as Odo leads the thief away, Lwaxana asks Bashir, "Doctor, I want to know everything there is to know about your security chief." And she's still smiling in the direction he moved off in.
Yeah, I think Bashir gets a bit of a double take as well.
And we then cut to credits, and then exterior Deep Space Nine. We're in Ops, where O'Brien is leaning over a control panel. And yeah, O'Brien is wrangling with the computer, asking it if the diagnostic on the fusion power plant is finished yet. The computer confirms that it's operating within normal parameters, but when O'Brien checks, it's operating at 13% below normal. The computer asserts that Cardassian specifications accept operating efficiency within 20%. 20%?
I mean, that seems really generous.
20% below accepted minimum. People's brain function is going to stop. I've just spotted Odo behind you.
Oh, yes, there he is.
Nice. 20%! When you're on a tin can floating in space! Flipping Cardassian. They must just be extremely hardy. They can just manage all of these variations and don't care if it's 20% outside parameters. Like, is she like a 40% space with it? Oh my god, no. Anyway, O'Brien calls over Anara, who is a Bajoran engineer, who is, I think, the first named member of staff that we haven't met yet. And sadly, she's only in this one episode.
Yes. I mean, all the way through this, I was wondering about Anara's introduction, thinking, to be honest, I was worried. Years of Star Trek watching made me think something horrible is going to happen to this member of staff who's just been introduced in Ops and we've never seen before. And then nothing bad happened, so I thought, oh, okay, great. And then we never see them again.
Really good point. That's a very good point. I should have had twigged that she was probably going to die in the episode, but no, she's just there, carries out normal functions around the station, and then disappears, never to be seen again.
So fair enough, I guess. But yes, I thoroughly actually enjoyed this scene, just because I love O'Brien having a fight with the computer and talking to it like it's a recalcitrant, colleague or pet. Very fitting for the episode. But I absolutely did, bump on that whole 20% margin. That's far too much, far too much. I think the implication as well is Kardashians must cut corners wherever possible.
This is very good
point. And I love that he says to it basically, because he then asks the system to, change some settings so we can improve performance. And the station says, no, this is not within guidance. I'm not letting you do it. And Brian says, I've had enough of your opinions. And I just thought that was so believable. This whole thing rings so truly of anybody who's worked any tech support or with any computer systems for a long period. It's just so familiar.
Absolutely. And when he said, I've had enough of your opinions, damn it, just do it, the computer starts reading the technical manual to him, saying, I put the Cardassian operational guidelines, paragraph 254A on screen. And But's like, I'm not going to read your tech manual, decides that they're going to do it for themselves. And
incredible attention to detail.
Refuses to do the tests for them. And he says, that's it, that's the straw. At which point Sisko arrives, going, relax, Chief, it's just a computer. Sisko has only just arrived and doesn't know what's going wrong. All he knows is that the Chief is shouting at the computer. Why is Sisko so relaxed? Why is he saying, calm down, Chief, it's just a computer? As if O'Brien doesn't know when something is going wrong.
Yeah.
It just... I think I've got a bee in my bonnet this episode about Sisko. I know that he isn't canonically a changeling. I think he fucking reads like one in this episode. He's just not being himself. He's just, he undercuts his staff at every opportunity in this episode. It's just not usual. I feel like he's been written by someone who hasn't known him for long, which is fair because we're only on episode 16, 17. But yeah, it just doesn't feel in character for him to wander up while the chief is very exercised about a technical problem. Say, calm down, it's only a computer.
Which, as we know, would never diffuse any situation. If you tell somebody to calm down, it's just an X. That's not going to help. You're right. It completely underestimates the situation for anybody.
It's only the computer that runs the entire station and keeps all of them alive. If something is wrong with it, that can be critical. What the hell, Sisko?
I think they try and get around it later by saying about how, nobody has O'Brien's sensitivity to the computer, I think it's trying to paint him as too much of a perfectionist, trying to get it to run to very exacting standards when, so far it's run fine, nothing's bad's happened. But I do take your point that, Sisko should have taken O'Brien more seriously. He's the guy that knows the most about how the systems run. I think, honestly, it was written more as a kind of interpersonal thing, which is Sisko is calm and unflappable, and Riley tolerating his chief engineers, fist shaking, rage against the machine.
Yeah, that is what he's enduring.
This is it. But O'Brien does say, this is no computer, this is my arch enemy. And I felt that. I felt that deep in my soul whenever I've been hurrying to try and get something done at work. And you just get errors and delays and lag. And I really want to throw something out a window. I felt a great deep kinship with Chief O'Brien at this moment. So I would not have taken well to Sisko saying, So I see where you're coming from.
O'Brien goes on to say that he couldn't keep looking at himself in the mirror if he allowed everything to continue performing as it is now. He says he'll have to do a root canal, which is engineering shorthand, but he'll have to get into its guts and rebuild it from the ground up. Sisko asks how long that might take, and he says, I'm still not that familiar with Cardassian technology, but I guess no more than 2-3 years. I thought it was established that he was quite familiar with Cardassian tech.
Yeah.
But he suddenly throws out, I'm not that familiar with Cardassian technology in this episode.
I wonder if this might be slightly out of sequence then.
That's possible, actually. We did say that the previous episode could have sat anywhere in the running order. Maybe there was some mixing around of episodes.
Because we've previously had episodes where O'Brien has said, I don't need to be around. The station's running well. I'm not having any problems. The systems haven't failed recently. So this feels a little bit...
It does feel out of sync, doesn't it? Because there have been episodes where there have been lots of tech errors, but not for a little while.
Not for a while. So this feels like a weird jump back.
Yeah. But yeah, it's at this point that Sisko says that he clearly doesn't have O'Brien's sensitivity to the computer. O'Brien throws his hands up and says, forget about it. But Sisko tells him, no, go ahead, do what you have to do. So O'Brien gets on with it. Then Bashir arrives with the ambassadors.
It just occurred to me, because that was something else I bumped on, was that actually O'Brien was quite aggressively dismissive in that kind of it's fine, nothing's wrong, but really aggressive way. And Sisko is just chief, and it's really odd that they're both in such very strange emotional places at that moment. And
I think you're right. It is intended to be big character work. It's meant to be contrasting the different temperaments of the two.
I think
but in a way that isn't normally carried out in this show.
No, exactly. I think that's what I bumped on. I was like, O'Brien is he's an emotional guy. He gets exasperated easily, but he was really, and he snaps at Sisko, and Sisko's like, "Chief."
He's more like Scotty in this episode.
Yeah.
Than either himself or
Yeah.
What's his name from TNG?
Geordie. Yes.
Geordie the Forge. Yeah, he's more like Scotty, more kind of irascible and fed up and Celtic, I guess. We've got an Irish chief engineer this time rather than a Scottish one.
Yeah,
but
I think that's not bad.
I don't think either of them is quite acting in character this episode, which I think is just a thing to do with the writers being different this time around.
I would agree with that. Good call. Sorry, I cut you off. Carry on.
No, gosh, no. Bashir arrives with the ambassadors. Sisko turns towards the camera, facing away from the ambassadors, and looks very fed up for a few moments, and then puts on a big smile before turning to face them. And Bashir says they insisted on seeing operations very apologetically because his whole remit for this episode is to keep them away from Sisko. And Sisko asks, I trust that Dr. Bashir has been taking care of all of your needs. I don't know why he emphasizes the word all. It makes it sound like he really does want them in the holodecks.
Whoa!
I know, right?
Yeah.
Tex starts complaining about accommodations again, and she says, if I have to sleep another night on a Cardassian bed with gargoyles staring down at me from the wood poles, and I'm like, I want to see this bed. Where is this bed? Where are these gargoyles? Why are you teasing us with this incredible Cardassian bed and they're not showing us one? I need one.
I made the exact same note saying, oh, she's not a fan of goth interior design then. Personally, I'm keen to see it because I've never seen, the gargoyles in the bedrooms. I mean, brilliant. Bring it on, DS9. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm picturing something fairly Spartan when we're talking about Cardassian guest quarters, but it sounds like they knew how to welcome their hosts, and it's like Dracula.
Brilliant. Well, if that's the case, crack on. Come on, I want to see it. Don't just tease me with one line of dialogue. I'm really keen to see that. So, yes, I also clocked on that line because it's not something we've ever seen or anybody's ever complained about before. Would be very curious to see. Shouting in the chat there, the Bakery Dragon, I can't think of a better guide for you than our horniest member of staff. Listen, no pink shaming on the promenade, but it's just a weird choice. But yeah.
Maybe that was what Sisko has in mind. Throw Bashir at them, take them to the holodecks, take care of all of their needs.
Listen, anything goes out here on the
music
frontier.
in the background, re-edit this episode, we could have a very different experience.
Deep Space Wine After Dark. Love it.
But yes, Kira then says, Commander, an unidentified vessel is coming through the wormhole, and Sisko excuses himself.
With haste.
Bashir walks the ambassadors over to the other end of the room where there's a screen with a better view of the wormhole. Let's see. Yeah,
so Kira reports the ship arriving through the wormhole.
He does. There are no life forms on board, an extensive computer array, but no signals to suggest that it's trying to maintain contact with a mothership. Dax doesn't recognize any known sub-processor patterns, which would tell them whether the computer aboard the vessel was compatible with that of Deep Space Nine, at which the Vulcan ambassador, Lojal, says, obviously, the young woman doesn't have the necessary experience. Perhaps if before Bashir interrupts him with the young woman over there, has over 300 years experience, ambassador. Heck yeah.
I loved it. Loved it. Immediately picked it up and was just like solidarity. Brilliant. Support your colleagues. Stand up to that kind of. It's basically misogyny. It's arrogance. It's we've noticed that kind of thing from Vulcans before. They tend to treat younger races with a bit of paternal dismissal. And I love that
we are all wildly emotional compared with the Vulcans, but yeah, this is a Federation. She's a scientist, isn't she, Dax?
Yeah, absolutely. It is out of character again, I think, for a Federation ambassador to say that kind of thing, think that kind of thing, and then not recognise that Dax is a Trill, therefore possibly joined. And therefore, probably really, Vulcans, I think, can live like 200-300 years. Trill can live, up to thousands of years. So it's weird. I think it's entirely set up just to give this weird moment where he's dismissive of Dax, and then a nice moment where Bashir is actually, no, I'm not having this. Dax is a brilliant scientist. Back off, which is lovely, but again, a bit out of character. So it's nice, but it is weird.
But it is also nice that they've had Bashir stand up to him instead of just being deferential, as he's having to be for much of this episode.
Yeah.
He is willing to intervene if one of his colleagues is being maligned, which is lovely. It speaks well of him.
It is. It's a nice chance actually for Bashir to be something other than
horny, stupid, puts his foot in it. Yeah. Poor Bashir.
You just reduced
incredible doctor, but he's not the best socially, bless him.
Yeah. I love how quickly you summed him up.
Anyway, Sisko does. Let's see. No, Sisko asks Kira to tow the probe to 500 meters off the docking ring, so that it's not near enough the station to be a risk, but close enough to analyze, and asks O'Brien to set up an adaptive interface link to see if they can download any information from it. Sisko then turns to Bashir with one eyebrow raised, indicating, get them the heck off my bridge. Bashir to the ambassadors, I think it would be best if we clear this area. Vadosia, the Bolian ambassador, thinks it will be appropriate for at least one Federation ambassador to be present in case the probe represents first contact with a new species, and he himself has a particular interest in first contact procedures. But Sisko appreciates his interest and says
like
that
this.
Well informed. I'm scheduling a briefing at 0400. In the meantime, Dr. Bashir, the best place to view this probe is from the docking ring near Port 7.
Brilliant.
0400 hours. I know that they're all aliens, they work to different schedules, but 4 o'clock in the morning for a briefing.
Oh, you're right. Yes, it is.
I don't know whether this was an attempt to put them off, or, if I hold it at 4 in the morning, none of them will want to be there. They'll need to sleep after the journey. I don't know why you chose 0400 hours otherwise. It just seems a really weird choice to make.
It really does, yeah. Unless we're expected to think that somehow... Yeah, Bajor's 24-hour, or I think 26-hour on the station is somehow reversed, and that's actually meant to be 4 in the afternoon. But yeah, that is very unusual. I've just popped up that lovely graphic as well of the wormhole opening on the main view screen because it is wonderful. And I think the Bolian ambassador says, "Is that it?" And Bashir is like, well, yes. And he says, well, I was expecting more somehow. I just feel like they're really piling on how disagreeable these people are because the wormhole effect is great. It's glorious and it looks good.
And they've presumably never seen it before. This is the first wormhole we've had. So
yeah, exactly. And it looks great on the monitor here. We've got Sisko walking away from it, Dax working at her station, and it's swirling away on the view screen. I think it looks great. I think it's a great scene. So they're really piling on how disagreeable the ambassadors are, which I feels a bit overkill at this point.
Well, they're grumpy. We know them to be grumpy. They will continue to be grumpy for a while yet.
That's it. Yeah. Also, I just wanted to flag as well, I thought it was very actually wise and cautious of Sisko to say, I'm not bringing that thing on my station. I don't know where it's been. I've read the logs of Kirk and Picard. I'm not just going to randomly interface with every weird space probe I bump into because that's a surefire way to get something weird on your ship, tearing the joint up. So I thought keeping it 500 meters off the docking ring. In fact, even that I thought was a bit close. And
it makes good in-world sense, doesn't it? Just to keep it away from the station.
It really does. Which is kind of jarring in itself because normally Star Trek viewers have to not use very good sense.
Beam it abroad immediately and then start digging at it.
Yeah. Exactly. That's what makes the plot go, even though you would think, haven't we tried this 100 times before and nearly died every time? Maybe we shouldn't do this. So I liked that Sisko was a bit practical this time.
Yes.
Thank you.
The ambassadors then walk around behind them. There's quite a lot of nice dynamic camera work in this episode, which I also enjoy. We've got Sisko and Kira working at their panels. The ambassadors walk behind them to the exit on the raised level of ops, and Sisko sighs exasperatedly as soon as they're out of view.
Very visibly, I love that.
We then cut to Odo in his office, where Odo is at his desk prodding at a pad. The camera pans to take in Lwaxana, who is standing in the doorway, and I think we've got an image of her in her outfit from this scene.
There she is, this wonderful blue, very flattering, very less is more, I think you might describe it.
Absolutely. It's actually its skin tone is the same colour as her skin. It's not actually see-through lace, but it looks like it is, which is the effect it's meant to give. And Lwaxana says, such concentration, such intensity, such passion for your work, tracking intergalactic malefactors.
I love that. I love the word malefactors. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say it, and it is wonderful. And it's just, it's Lwaxana all over. I mean, what an intro. The only thing I bumped on was, did Odo not hear the door go?
It's the security office. You would think that of all of the doors on the station, this one would make an audible sound when someone bursts in. But yeah, you're right. She's just standing there with the door open, and he hasn't noticed.
It would interrupt the flow of that scene, and I totally get that. And it's a beautiful scene. It just doesn't. You've got to suspend your in-universe belief there that somehow Odo sat at his desk about 2 feet away would not have heard those massive doors roll back. Sure, okay, why not?
Yes, Odo responds that most people find it rather tedious.
Mm.
And Lwaxana begs to differ, saying that those who have benefited from his work know that you are the thin beige line between order and chaos, referring to the, I think, 20th century phrase thin blue line for the police, which is nice because it refers to the colour of Odo's uniform. Odo's a bit nonplussed and just responds, "That's my job. Now, what can I do for you? You haven't lost anything else, I hope." And Lwaxana responds, "Only my heart," and smiles at him. She's so full on.
She is. And I think it's a good way to, I think, gauge your appreciation for Star Trek as a whole. It's that point at which you move from, oh God, Picard's reaction, which is, oh God, it's a Lwaxana episode, horror, to, fond amusement. And you're like, actually, you know what? She's great. She's life and soul. She's a contrast to everything else in the show. You can really appreciate watching her because she's funny and entertaining. I think that is a watermark moment in any Star Trek fan's life. If, however, you stay hating her, that's a legitimate point of view. But
I do have friends who dislike her strongly, and I think this scene as it goes on is a very good example of why that is.
Do not let me stop you there, because I think we are getting to actually a very good observation there. So please, yes, press on.
So Lwaxana said she's only lost her heart. Odo says, "I beg your pardon." Lwaxana asks, is Odo your first or last name? Odo just says, "Yes."
I love that. I did just want to quickly say, I like that, because in Star Trek, I don't think enough people do ask, how does your name work? Because we're introduced to a lot of people who have a signifier. I don't know if Quark is a one name or a surname or a first name. I don't know what Rom is, or Nog.
That's a very good point. I just assume that the Ferengi are nomonyms.
Yeah, they absolutely could be, but nobody ever explains that. Nobody ever asks, except for Federation Ambassador Lwaxana. So thank you. I appreciate her asking.
That's a really good point. I wonder if they've tried to move away from it just because Bajorans, quite famously at this point, have a reversal of the usual order of names. Their given name comes after their surname, meaning that Major Kira is Major Kira Nerys. Yes. Officer Rowe was Rowe Laren. So I wonder whether they've deliberately cut back on conversations about names, because you could repeat that every single time a new Bajoran character is introduced to a non-Bajoran one.
I think that's a reasonable thing to say.
But no, you're right, it is nice that she's asked. Anyway, Odo says that, yes, she can call him Odo. And she says it has a certain lyrical quality. Odo asks, lyrical? It's a real contrast between the very poetic, romantic Lwaxana and the very staid, reserved, very, utilitarian, I guess, Odo. He says what needs to be said and nothing more, and doesn't put any more thought into it than that. He looks very, very wary at this point. And it's here where Lwaxana has moved towards him and raises her hands near his chest and slowly backs him against a wall while saying, "Odo." It rolls off the tongue. She is extremely comfortable. He is not. Yes. She raises the finger and she traces it around his comm badge on his chest, at which point he says, "Oh, I have a lot of work to do." And she says, "I understand you're a shapeshifter. I've never been with a shapeshifter." Odo says, "Been with?" And he's up against a wall. He looks panicked.
He's visibly uncomfortable with the situation, so it's worse, I think.
Definitely. I'll give Lwaxana's next line and then I'll go into it.
Please.
Lwaxana says, "All the men I've known have needed to be shaped and molded and manipulated, and finally I've met a man who knows how to do it himself."
And Odo just goes, and it's just, wow, yeah.
She leans in slowly as if to kiss him, and he ums and ahs nervously before looking away and saying, "Is that the comm? Excuse me, I think this is the comm. I've got to get to ops." And just running out of the room. She just leans back against the console, smiling dazedly after him. I'm going to have a rant about this because I had a lot of thoughts. They're not necessarily good order. I've done my best. Lwaxana is an absolute bloody horror in this scene. Odo is very clearly uncomfortable. They are alone in a room together. And I discussed this scene with some friends online after watching the episode. One friend felt that in his position as security chief aboard Deep Space Nine, Odo wields a lot of authority. He has a lot of power. While I strongly feel that Lwaxana, in both her actions in this scene and in her position as an ambassador, has a lot of power over Odo.
Yes.
He is a worker while she is upper class. He is at her service and she is there to make demands of him. He is sexually naive and she is very worldly and experienced. If she wanted him removed from his post aboard Deep Space Nine, she has a lot of powerful connections that she could use to make that happen. And later on in the Bashir subplot, Bashir himself tells Sisko that the ambassadors could wreck his career as easily as they could influence it positively. So the writers know that this dynamic is there. They know that everyone aboard is at the whim of the ambassadors. And if Odo wants Lwaxana to stop harassing him, the only thing he can do is go to his manager for help. We see that happen in a couple of scenes' time, and it doesn't go well. I think that the tone of this scene and Sisko's response are indicative of a 90s attitude that because men often or usually are at social, financial, physical, etc. advantage compared with women, it was usually read as funny in the 90s when a woman on TV overpowered a man or made him uncomfortable or came on too strong with him. I couldn't find a name for this trope on TV tropes, but I'm certain there'll be other examples from mostly from sitcoms. Lwaxana is a very powerful, boastful, colourful, and loud character. She frequently makes the men around her uncomfortable during her appearances on The Next Generation. And a part of me, as you said, Tim, a part of me really enjoys that. In The Next Generation, she upsets the usual balance of power. She can storm in without a moment's notice and take all the power in the room away from the very uptight and powerful Jean-Luc Picard, who we don't often see him flustered. It is fun to see that. But similarly, I think in this scene, we're meant to find Odo's discomfort funny. He's usually private and uptight, and here a character is pushing against his very rigid boundaries. I think we're meant to find it funny, partly because of our knowledge of Odo, and partly because we're not meant to see a woman as being a real threat to a man in a situation like this. If she was subordinate to him, she'd be an irritation. He could have her moved to another team. He could have her put on a post away from the station. But he can't do that with Lwaxana Troi. I'm very aware while watching the scene that there are times when men in the real world are harassed by women, and that there are situations where women have positions of systemic power over some men. And that one person sexually harassing another in any context is never okay. And it's really insensitive to play it up for laughs. So I wish that they hadn't done that here. I've got one paragraph left to go, and then we can resume the episode.
No, please, carry on.
All of that said, I think that in the arc of this episode, Lwaxana's over-the-top forcefulness in this scene works as part of the story, as part of the narrative of what happens to her and Odo. Showing a character doing something on screen is not the same thing as condoning it. And I think over the course of this episode, Lwaxana learns to be more gentle with Odo. She eventually comes to meet him as an equal. And that works so effectively in the later scene where they are equal, because the dynamic was so different to begin with, because she was managing it very, very badly. And I think that if I wanted to adjust this scene in any way, all I would have done was something like reframing the shots. So I might have had Odo closer to camera and Lwaxana moving in towards us as well as him, to put us in the position of his vulnerability being preyed on by Lwaxana. And in a couple of scenes' time, I would have had Sisko take him more seriously, but we will talk about that when we get to it. So that was all of my thoughts about it. I felt very strongly about it because I dislike seeing a character preyed upon by another. And I dislike the fact that I think that René Auberjonois' acting indicates to us that we're meant to find it funny. The level of his discomfort is played as if comedically, but it isn't funny. She's coming after someone who doesn't have any power to repel her.
And yet we see Jean-Luc Picard adopting very much the same attitude. And he is also technically subordinate to somebody like Lwaxana, because she is Federation ambassador, which is a very senior position in the Federation, the government that is responsible for Starfleet. So, but
this is true.
I think you're right. I think it is the added angle of Odo's personal naivete in those kind of situations is what gives it an added veneer of uncomfort, which is, somebody like Jean-Luc, who is still, an astute and experienced gentleman who can negotiate that kind of situation more confidently. Odo can't. He's fully out of his comfort zone in this situation.
You're very right, actually. Culturally, we've seen Picard. He's had many lovers. We know this about him. And whenever a female ambassador comes aboard, usually, or not ambassadors, usually it's admirals, isn't it? Seems to have made his way around. He either knows them through their family or they've had a relationship before now, and he is of the same class as them.
That's it as well. There was that similar, attitude, approach, that's kind of social position, instant as much as the society is kind of hard to define in the Federation. There is still, that parity between Picard and Lwaxana, which, does not exist here. Simply between Odo and Lwaxana. I also found it very. It was a power dynamic that, if reversed, would be uncomfortable. But in this situation, is flipped 180 degrees for 90s sitcom comedy values. That's what it is. And we said right back at the beginning of this podcast that we would look at things like this, and accept that they were made in a different environment 30 years ago. Different values prevailed, but we are, 21st century viewers, and we're not going to just, say, different times, because that is a lazy, easy excuse. So,
and I also don't think, as I say, I don't think that showing something on the screen is the same thing as condoning it. I think there are ways of showing her behaving badly, and we know that she's behaving badly here. We know that Odo isn't enjoying it, and she should not be doing this.
This is it.
But it's the difference between she shouldn't be doing this, but it's hilarious, and she shouldn't be doing this, it makes me uncomfortable.
Yes. That's what changes. I think that's really valid to observe. Bakery Dragon in the chat there, very much also agreeing with you, saying this is super important to talk on, and that Odo does have power relative to many people in the station, but definitely not with everyone, and not in this situation. As you correctly surmised, Lwaxana has power above and beyond, everybody. Even Sisko's being deferential to her, and Sisko's so far always been the uppermost power on the station. There's a massive power imbalance. I can't add anything. I think you summed it up brilliantly. We know why they've done it, but that does not make it, I think, any more palatable. But the only redeeming fact is it's part of a character arc in this episode, and it will change.
I think it does serve the story well, and it is in line with her character as we know her. I wouldn't necessarily expect her to act differently, but it's about how the framing tells you you're meant to respond to it, which is subtle, but I think it's there. In the next scene, we cut to an exterior of Deep Space Nine, and then to a high view over ops. The computer announces that the data transfer from the strange vessel can commence. O'Brien expresses surprise at this, because the computer is doing something quickly now. Dax asks why he's so shocked, and O'Brien says, knowing this computer, I thought I'd have to reconfigure the whole emulator module to make it compatible with the probe, but it's cooperating for once. And the computer then says, transfer of data is complete. O'Brien very gratefully says, well done, computer. He's really acting up for he's pleased this time. Dax asks the computer to translate the data from the probe and isolate syntax results, while in the background Odo arrives and exits the turbo lift. We then cut to O'Brien, and Odo is still... Actually, yes, this was just a really nice instance of camera work. We've got Jadzia sitting at one terminal, and Odo walks around behind her. We then see an opposite angle from the camera, so shooting on Dax, then shooting on O'Brien. And Renee Auberjonois continues walking on the same course. And I think I assume they didn't have both cameras running simultaneously. They probably took down, set up again, and had him keep walking. It's just lovely attention to detail on these all-round sets.
I can't believe I took that for granted. One of the things we both love is that the cinematography in Deep Space Nine is often very ambitious and experimental, and something like that, is great. It gives you continuity. It gives you that lovely concept of depth, which I think was missing from something like the Enterprise D, where everybody was very much in fixed positions, people very rarely... It
was all one wall of the room.
Exactly. And other than Worf occasionally jumping over that lovely sweeping banister to get knocked down by whatever had invaded the bridge that week, there wasn't a lot of movement between them, or somebody walking up to a turbo lift. There wasn't a lot of movement around, whereas ops, I always get the feel like people are always on the way somewhere else to do something else.
They've got a little mezzanine level, you've got the raised bit before you go in the turbo. It's beautiful. It's just a lovely set, and they really make the most of it.
I'm glad you clocked that, because I totally missed that, and I want to appreciate all these great moments.
So we are now in Sisko's office, and Odo is being vulnerable. He says, Commander, I have a problem. And Sisko has to Quark again. No, sir, this one's named Lwaxana. And Sisko frowns while asking, Lwaxana Troi, the ambassador. And I was a little surprised that he's not appraised of the situation, because usually he seems very on top of who all the important people are, who all the different races are, what's happening across the universe. I wonder whether everyone who's met Lwaxana has just had to be extremely guarded in what they put in their logs about her. Because she is such a menace. She's a known menace, but
Mhm.
Picard couldn't have put that in his
She's
logs. Nobody
she's the
could.
ambassador for a whole core member world of the Federation. She does have significant political power and pull, you know. So yeah, I can imagine people have to step carefully around her, which again discreetly hints at that power imbalance she has, you know. Because I would say normally anybody holding an exalted rank of ambassador has to be careful in how they conduct themselves, because they are representative of a government, of a people, of a world. They have to be diplomatic. Troi never is, but she never gets pulled up on it. So I don't know.
In this episode, none of the ambassadors are. They're all
Well,
terribly.
this is it. It's so weird.
Yeah, it just seemed to be a weird class thing in this episode, I think. So as you say, they should be the representative of their world. They should take it extremely seriously.
Yeah.
But they just take the view that no, we're important. Give us information. Show us what we want.
That's exactly it. It's weirdly bullying, and I do not get it, and it feels really weird. But you're right. So this is Odo. He has come for, as I put it, guy advice from Sisko, which is not a situation I would never expect to be. And this scene is really interesting. So please press on with it.
Yes. Odo says there was a minor incident at the bar that he helped her with, and now she's grateful. Which reminded me of an episode I love of TNG when Picard explains to Riker that Q wants to do something nice for me, and Riker says, "I'll put everyone on red alert, sir." Having Lwaxana be grateful to you is an unfortunate position to be in. And Odo says that the problem is the manner in which she expresses her gratitude. To be honest, Commander, she seems interested in me, and he seems quite incredulous at that. He hasn't experienced this before.
No.
He doesn't understand why she's showing an interest in him. And he has picked up on it. She was not being at all subtle, but he doesn't know what to do with it. And Sisko just smiles and asks, "What's wrong with that?" And Odo says, "She's extremely aggressive," and he isn't wrong. She backed him up against the wall.
Yeah.
And Sisko says, "I see, so she's after you." Odo says, "Like a Wenoni trace hound." We love a good animal analogy. That's not easy to say after a bit of wine. This is the first and only instance of a Wenoni trace hound being mentioned in any Star Trek series. But according to Memory Alpha, in Star Trek, the Starfleet Survival Guide, they describe the Wenoni trace hound as a native of Arak 3, which has exoskeletal armor plates and venomous spines on its neck.
Wow.
And the book includes advice on how to avoid them. So from this one description of Lwaxana Troi, they've picked up, yeah, this is a very dangerous animal indeed.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, they did it a fair bit in the last episode as well with the emu. The space emu had a space name as well.
Yes.
So Deep Space Nine is dreadful for introducing these animal allegories. But yes, very much. Yeah, I clocked that as well. Sci-fi tropey namey of things. But
Yeah,
thoroughly
it's
enjoyed
cute.
that.
Enjoy it.
But it
Sisko's response to that is,
it's playing it for comedy,
sorry.
Isn't it? Sorry, I was just going to say it's playing it for comedy, but they are discussing a very serious matter. So please do.
are. But Sisko responds to this by saying, "Have you thought of letting her catch you?" I mean, firstly, Odo is intensely private. You don't just ask him if he wants to shag Lwaxana Troi. You just don't, mate. You're his manager. Secondly, he came here to ask for your help. Don't just tell him to go out there and bonk her, you absolute monster. I think the framing by Sisko of Odo's complaint as not being serious feels out of character and doesn't work for me. I think the episode could have had Sisko take it seriously. He could have offered, "You're right, it is inappropriate of her, and you do not have the authority to tell her to go fuck herself.
Exactly.
So I will." He could have offered to intervene. He could have said, I will quietly ask her to step back. I will ask her not to spend any more time with you." And then they could have got stuck together in a turbo lift before he has a chance to do that. The episode doesn't require that Sisko is useless in this situation.
No.
I think it is played as Sisko is relaxed in this episode. Actually, one other thing they could have done to kind of highlight that would have been, maybe he's got a book he wants to read. We could have had shots of Sisko in his office, putting the book down every time another thing happens. I need something to explain why Sisko is so hands-off this episode, because it's just not like him.
It's exactly what I was coming to, and you've opened my eyes, because I'm thinking about how much he does just dismiss his junior staff's legitimate concerns and go like, "Haha, yeah, it's rough, isn't it? Anyway, bye-bye now. Get out of my office and go deal with it."
He does it to Odo, he does it to Bashir, he does it to the chief in one of the first scenes.
Exactly.
what the hell, Sisko? What's happening this week?
He is ducking everything, and he doesn't even end up with loads to do later on. He gets to shoot a door and tell some people to make some things happen. And that's about it. It's weird. Previously we have seen Sisko be incredibly switched on, receptive to his staff, if wishes were horses, Brian calls him and says, "You better get into my quarters right now." And because he's a good commander and he knows his staff, he knows that Brian wouldn't ask him that out of anything other than.
At that point, he is relaxing with his feet up and reading a book, and he puts it down immediately.
He puts it down because he knows. He knows, and right now it's like he's forgotten it. All I can think is, again, this episode, not written by people who know it very well, and possibly should have been set a bit earlier in the series. I don't know.
Yeah, probably so. It does feel like they're still finding their feet with the characters, but I would just like something to explain that, Sisko wants time to himself this episode. This is why, and it doesn't have to be a big why. It can just be he wants to have a nice drink and read his book about baseball.
You're being very generous, Kat, because in my opinion, he doesn't get time off. He is commander of a station on the frontier. He has to always be on, and he has to be on top of his game and attentive to his staff, and he just isn't. And there is no reason. We don't need to give him an excuse. Don't give him an excuse, Kat. We're going to hold him to account. That's what this podcast is all about.
He's a single dad out in the middle of nowhere. Oh, sod.
He deserves his time off, but not now. He is on duty, so.
But yes. Anyways, Sisko goes on to say, "A little romance, Odo." I'm like, seriously, is Sisko a changeling in this episode? He's not doing well. He goes on to suggest that, Odo says, "I have 6 pylons that need a complete security sweep. I don't have time for romantic interludes." And he sighs and sits down and says, "Frankly, in my humble opinion, most of you humanoids spend far too much time on your respective mating rituals," which, given what he's seen of the holodecks, is fair. All he sees people disappearing into a room and emerging satisfied. However many hours later, there's no point to it for him.
They've spent money. They compromise themselves. It's vended by Quark.
They make noises that everyone in the bar can hear. That one episode with the Nagus cackling away to himself. Oh my god, they need some insulation on those rooms.
Oh, it's horrendous concept.
But Sisko's response to this from Odo is, "It does help the procreation of one species." My note is, of what relevance is this to a man who is alone in the universe? For fuck's sake, Sisko. Odo is a shapeshifter. We don't even know how or if they procreate. They might procreate by mitosis. Why is he saying that? Why, Sisko? Yeah. Why?
Those are great reasons. I just didn't like it in general because it feels like such a mealy-mouthed, superior dismissal. Oh, well. It does help, but nobody thinks about it that way.
For life to exist,
nobody goes to bed with anybody.
No,
it's such a poor line. I really didn't enjoy that line either.
And the reason it's there is so that Odo can respond with, "Procreation does not require changing how you smell or writing bad poetry or sacrificing various plants to serve as tokens of affection. In any event, it's all irrelevant to me." And I'm like, defamiliarization of Earth customs. Very funny.
Yes.
But it is also an expression that Odo currently has no sexual interest or drive. It's just not something that he has experienced or explored at all.
No.
So Sisko telling him to go and bonk Lwaxana is not helpful. But Sisko just replies, "I'm sorry to hear that." And Odo says, "I would appreciate it if you would do something about this one." He's being forthright. He's saying he has a need. He needs his manager to intervene.
And Sisko is the person who should, as the senior most station person on the station, interacting with Federation officials, it is his job to be this intermediary and say,
absolutely. And Odo deals with a lot of people, but he's being vulnerable here. He's a very independent person, and he's saying, "I need your help." And Sisko is fucking brushing him off.
Yeah.
Odo says, "I would appreciate it if you would do something about this woman. Just tell her to leave me alone." And Sisko's still leaning back, "Constable, you can handle thieves and killers, but not one betazoid woman." Okay, is that because no thief or killer could be a betazoid or a woman? It just feels like the 90s, women are weak, and therefore it's funny when they harass men.
That's exactly what it is.
One betazoid woman. Yeah, she's telepathic, for fuck's sake, and she's an ambassador, and she's very powerful and very strong-willed. And Odo is very naive. And asking you for help. What the hell?
It's weird. It's so weird. He's like aggressively trying to bury Odo's legitimate concerns and dismiss them.
It's bizarre how light-hearted Sisko is in this scene. Even in the 90s, when we've seen him taking everything so seriously previously, he's not offering good advice. He's just like, if you don't want to get fucked, I can't help you, mate. What the hell? Be a commander, dude. Oh, anyway, yeah. Odo says, I understand thieves and killers. I don't understand her. And Sisko says, I can't help you, Odo. And I've just written, you are in a position to, you absolute
You
muffin.
absolutely can. It's so weird.
Odo says, I'm just trying to avoid a diplomatic incident. I don't want to insult the ambassador. Odo is being so reasonable, and he's going to such lengths to explain what the problem is and why he needs help from someone who is better at diplomacy than he is.
Yeah.
And Sisko just says, a reasonable concern. I suggest you handle the matter with great delicacy. Why, Odo has no experience at all with romance. Sisko does. He's not even giving him good guy advice. He's just brushing him off. And I've put that Odo's expression looks like a grumble here, even though he's silent. And Odo then says, I don't handle delicacy very well. He knows himself, and he's admitting one of his weaknesses. And Sisko just blinks at him twice, and Odo just then gets up and leaves.
The whole thing is being played for laughs, despite the fact that it is far from a humorous situation. It is those 90s values of what constitutes comedy coming through, unfortunately.
It's that Odo is a character who is very uncomfortable with romantic situations, and he wants some help with this. Yeah. And the idea of a man being uncomfortable with those situations is apparently inherently humorous.
Yes, that's essentially it.
The idea of feeling threatened by a woman who is trying to force herself on him is humorous. No, it's not good. I dislike it strongly. And I think just as Deep Space Nine, I dislike it for Sisko. It's not in character for him.
It's not in character.
Feel like how he would respond here. And it's not how he would expect Jake to respond.
No, that's a very good point.
He's a decent guy and he's doing a decent job of being a dad. And in this episode, he's just dropped the ball for everybody. He's not space dad. He's space louche guy who's just like, no, just go and try getting shagged. It'll do you good. I'm like, no. Ugh.
Yeah. Again, we're just going to have to unfortunately credit it up to some really substandard writing and editing and characterization.
The indoor cat says, Sisko does this thing where he's just, well, that's nice that you have that problem. Good luck. Maybe he does that more in the future. I just feel like he's been more...
It does.
He's been more kind of constructively helpful before now. This episode, he really is just letting everyone find their own feet. He's just kind of leaving it to them, which, sure, is a parenting method. But when someone asks you for help, Guy, you don't just tell them to go away, which he does.
100%. I also like the Baker Dragon flagging up that this is a reversal from earlier where Bashir defended a subordinate in the form of Lieutenant Dax from the Vulcan ambassador. So they can do it. They can write it in a, no, you can't talk down to people like that. And in this, they just seem to have forgotten that completely and just been like, haha, isn't it funny when roles are reversed? It's like, this is not... No. This is not the Seinfeld show. We don't just gag on things like that, okay? So.
Oh, absolutely. I think they're probably trying to state that they are not sexist because they know that it is wrong for a man to do that to a woman, but when a woman does do it to her, and hey, it's all good.
It's hilarious.
Yeah. But yes, back in ops, Anara and O'Brien are at consoles, and they've decided that yes, it is a probe. Anara says that it's made of corundium alloy, and apparently, according to Memory Alpha, this is the only place in Trek where corundium is mentioned. They're just coining words left, right, and centre this episode. It doesn't exist in the real world, but there's an aluminium oxide called corundum, which does, but the shooting script does say corundium. She does pronounce it correctly. The computer announces that its analysis is complete, and O'Brien says, already? He calls Dax over. And Dax says there's no science modules, no communication system, and enough computer capacity to run a Galaxy-class starship, which is the Enterprise class. Brian says that's an awful lot of computer hardware simply to navigate a probe. I've got image 4, a coudogram. Yes, we've got a little picture of the screen that Brian is looking at.
Love this design.
It's beautiful. I love the array of colours that they use here, because I think they just had, I want to say red, yellow, green on the TNG ones, whereas this one's got quite a few different colours in it.
Yes.
You've got purples, blues. Rather beautiful.
It is, and you can tell it's actually detailed way beyond the resolution of 90s film cameras at the time, so you can tell that a lot of work's gone into making this thing look detailed accurate, and as you
The
say,
little image on there is of the probe that they've
yes.
built.
Oh, it is. Yes, you can actually see that rotating there. The actual image of the probe itself. It's great, and it looks, as you say, so different to the TNG computer systems, which is such a clever design element to really distinguish your show from the shadow of that much older, more successful brother or sister.
Very much so. I think they did a really good job of keeping it looking like Trek while expanding on what that can look like. It's wonderful.
100%.
Kira says, anything? And Dax says, nothing suggests the probe's mission or any hint of its origin. Apparently there was a missing scene here in the shooting script. There's a scene where Bashir and the ambassadors are going to the infirmary because Fedosia has a headache, and Bashir offers him a full body scan, and Fedosia's like, well, we've got time. But they cut that out for some reason. So the next shot we have is Odo leaving a turbo lift and looking trepidatious, looking around. And then when he thinks that the coast is clear, he leaves the lift. And then Lwaxana calls from down the corridor, there you are, Odo, at which he turns and tries to run back through the turbo lift doors, which have already slid closed. Lwaxana asks him, have you ever been on the fourth moon of Andevan 2 at dawn? Odo hasn't, and Luana says she's reserved a hollow suite for them from that nice fellow Quark.
I bet that planet never gets mentioned again either.
No, I didn't look up Andevian, but
it probably didn't. I think they're just throwing lots of new things in that will never be revisited.
Which, bless the cast for having to remember these completely made-up words.
There's a lot of brand new dialogue in this episode, actually, so credit to them all. Especially the Chief. He gets loads of gobbledygook.
Bless him, he deals really well with it. Odo says, you told Quark that you were going into a hollow suite with me? And my nose just say, ha, 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 ha. This is objectively funny, just because of who Quark and Odo are and what their relationship is to each other. This isn't about Lwaxana pulling rank. This is about Quark knowing that she wants to have sex with Odo.
Yes,
and that Odo is apparently going to go and do it.
That's exactly how I took it as well. I love the idea of Odo being embarrassed in front of Quark. That's exactly what this is.
Sadly, we don't ever carry out on that. Quark doesn't again in this episode, so we never find out. I imagine there must be fanfics of that scene, though, because that would just be so much fun. But yes, Lwaxana says, well, of course, he's preparing a special picnic basket for us. Odo says, good Lord. And as always, when someone mentions God, which good Lord? Who? What? Does Odo have a religion now?
It's like
it's a gentle earth oath. Later in the episode, Kira says, oh God. I think it is just a way of not swearing on 90s television while expressing surprise or exasperation.
Yep.
It's appropriate language for a 90s English-speaking audience. And I think in world, we just have to assume that it's a choice made by the universal translator for us.
That's exactly how I always rationalise it, you know. If we actually have the Bajorans always going by the prophets all the time, it would be too jarring, you know. There needs to be a certain suspension of that and allow us to relate to them.
I don't know. I like
it's great
with a name for a space Jesus and just having them saying a nonsense word every so often. That would work for me. I'm well aware that Space Jesus ends up being put on one of the characters later on. We haven't watched that far yet.
No spoilers, no spoilers. Remind the chat, no spoilers.
I've seen the memes, I don't know what they mean.
This is it. Cat's spoiled every other day by the memes. But, you know, let's try and preserve...
I know a lot of what is said, but I don't know what any of it relates to. It's a weird place to be. But I'm looking forward to finding out. Anyway, Odo very quickly says, I'm afraid I'm not available. I have to get to Upper Pylon 3 immediately. He steps into the turbo lift and Lwaxana follows him in. Not knowing how these work, she walks to the back wall and just raps on it a few times before saying, Upper Pylon 3. I've always wanted to see an Upper Pylon, which is a lie. The doors slide closed behind them. And then there's an internal view of the turbo lift, which we have an image of.
We do indeed.
Sadly, we don't have a clip of it, but there is very fast moving. We see the closed doors mixing with the pipes and wires that are in between the floors, which we haven't seen before. It's a really nice graphic, and it must have taken some effort to put together. See, just look at that. It looks perfect. And as far as I know, that is computer generated and just sliding by quickly in the background. But yeah, just the definition that they put on it, they could have just made it a grey blur, but it looks wonderful.
It does, and as we both discussed in the setup for this evening's podcast, it also looks deadly. Like you could put your hand out and lose it up to the wrist. And this sheer
Very
face of the
true.
turbo lift shaft just sliding past you very,
because
very quickly.
on the Enterprise, everything is ergonomic. Everything
Yeah.
is sealed away. You have to pry away panels or climb into a Jeffries tube to see how it works. Whereas, here you're right. There isn't just that smooth, round turbo lift. There are opening doors at either side, and all of this exposed pipe work there. It looks functional, but also a bit shonky. You wouldn't leave it like that if this were Federation. That's a really good observation, Tim.
I love anything that reminds us that this is a Cardassian station designed by aliens, not massively designed for our crew. I like it. It's ever so slightly unsettling all the time. Keeps you on edge.
It does. And Lwaxana says that she will have the picnic basket sent up by one of Quark's minions in the days when minion didn't mean a small yellow object wearing dungarees.
Ugh.
Oh, I miss the word minions so much.
Mm.
Odo impatiently explains to her that he doesn't eat. He says, "This is not a real mouth. It is an approximation of one. I don't have an esophagus, or a stomach, or a digestive system. I am not like you. Every 16 hours, I turn into a liquid." And in response to this, we get Lwaxana's immortal line, "I can swim."
And it's great.
I love it. It's beautiful. It's such a gorgeous one-liner from her, and it just encapsulates her readiness to overlook any perceived barriers between her and the person she's currently obsessed with. I love it so much. But I also love how, as he is talking, we get a shot not only of him talking face onto the camera, but we get a shot over his shoulder of her responding, and she's looking at him very carefully.
Yes.
She isn't smiling anymore. She's going, and she's just looking intently, actually listening to what he's saying. Whereas often I think Lwaxana will go, "Oh, nothing, it's nonsense, it's all fine.
Yes.
You can enjoy the smell of the picnic if nothing." No, she doesn't do that. She listens to him. She pays attention to him. I think for the first time properly this episode.
I would say so. And I immediately wrote that. I said, she delivers it with such sincerity that is a contrast to how she has previously spoken. So you feel like she is actually engaging with Odo and going, well, that's fine, you're different. I've met any number of aliens, as we know from TNG alone, she has met any number of aliens. So there is a reason, I think it is. It hits us all so effectively just because it feels like the realest thing she's said all episode, which is wonderful.
And it's a beautiful one-liner, perfectly delivered.
I thought so. I wonder if I might beg everyone's understanding and suggest a quick comfort break, for we are 1 hour 23 minutes in, and I wouldn't mind a quick departure. So
shall we lower the curtains for a few moments?
That's what I'm thinking. So I would ask chat to bear with us just for a couple of minutes while we, take a little bit of time, recompile ourselves, and we will return very sharply. Okay?
See you soon.
Wonderful. See you soon. And we are back. Thank you so much for bearing with us.
Right, so we've just had Lwaxana's "I can swim," which, as well as a wonderful line, is also a complete dismissal of all of Odo's attempts to rebuff her. Odo groans, and then some of the lights cut out as the turbo lift zhooms to a halt. Odo tries to talk to the computer, which doesn't respond. He taps his comm badge and hails ops, and Kira replies. He explains that he and Ambassador Troi are stuck in turbo lift 7. Anara says that power to the pylon turbo lift has failed. Dax tries to beam them out, but the transporters have also failed. Lwaxana smiles as Kira says that the transporter is down and the ops team will get to them as soon as they can. Lwaxana sighs happily and says, "Alone at last." And then we get a kind of Jaws zoom in on Odo's face with a minor string chord playing, just to emphasize that this is horrific, this is bad, this is terrible, this is a horror scenario. Oh, poor Odo.
Yeah, I picked up on that as well, and it just lends weight again to our suspicions that this whole thing's been written as a very 90s sitcom, very nudge, nudge, wink, wink comedy, which is
definitely
a little bit tied by their standards. By our standards, it's almost like Jurassic. It's just very outdated comedy. So I remember.
I think during this scene, for all that they're stuck together in a small space, she is less physically inappropriate than she was in the previous scene. Yeah. She gives him enough space while they're talking to each other. So I think I feel far less concerned by what she is doing from this point onwards, pretty much. they start to converse more properly from this point on. So I think even though putting someone in a lift with someone who has been harassing them shortly before could have been a recipe for absolute horror, they play it quite well, I think, from this point onwards. They're a bit more sensitive with the way the dialogue is worked.
Yes, they seem to be writing in a way that redeems the characters and the decisions they've made so far. So, yeah, this is an upswing moment.
So we then cut to an exterior of Deep Space Nine and then to Ops, where the computer is reporting that every element of the turbolift power net is functioning normally, and O'Brien is very irritated. And he says that if they were on a starship, he'd reroute the EPS power flow in a couple of hours, but with this computer, there's no telling how long it'll take. And I've put that there are always problems about DS9, but I think this is the first time O'Brien has had big complaints about the functioning of the main computer.
It is, absolutely.
And it just feels very kind of speed of plot. They've made that the case in this episode because it carries the plot along.
Yes.
They could have set this up better. They could have had in previous episodes him wrangling with a computer that keeps telling him no. It could have been quick bits of dialogue because he's had a lot of different things to fix.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we've had a lot of scenes of O'Brien popping out of manhole covers, coming in and out of behind the replicators and fixing them. We've seen him doing a lot of technical work. We haven't had many conversations between him and the computer where the computer has been a very present voice. In fact, it was only a couple of episodes ago that I realised that the computer aboard Teroknar isn't played by Majel Barrett. The voice is so similar. It's a female voice, but it is different because it isn't a Federation ship. All of the shuttles have Majel Barrett's voice and the standard Federation computer.
Oh, they do? I didn't realise that.
Yeah, they do. But the fact is that the difference is a subtle one. You might not notice that. It would have been really nice if there had been a stark difference between, oh, thank goodness, we're on a shuttle, the computer's being polite again.
Yeah.
And on Teroknar, they could have had a very different voice. They could have had a male voice. They could have had an accented voice. They could have had a computer that just frequently tells them, that is not within my parameters. You could have had any catchphrase for the computer, and they just haven't done it. The computer isn't annoying, and it does do what it's told.
100%.
Until this episode. So this whole plot just doesn't work for me because it hasn't been adequately set up. It just feels like it's suddenly occurred and suddenly O'Brien is expected to pretend this has been happening all along.
It is a problem in a can. Lieutenant Indoor Cat says this was a weird set up the problem O'Brien was facing. It is entirely constructed just for this episode. You're right, O'Brien spent all his time fixing bits around the station, but not the main computer. That's always been responsive. So it is completely contrived for the episode, which is a little bit of a letdown. I hadn't actually clocked that myself. And you're absolutely right, it is, which is just...
I kind of, when thinking about this, I have to remind myself that they've created an entire new TV show with so many different moving parts, different elements to it. And most of it is, even at this early stage, it's very elegantly constructed.
It is. There were so many things they do well.
Absolutely. So it is just one oversight that they haven't made the computer noticeably different, but it would have been nice. It's one thing that would have influenced so many little parts of each episode and would have set up this story nicely. And they didn't think to do it, which I think was a bit of a shame. They may have had reasons not to. So anyway, Sisko tells him to get started since O'Brien doesn't know how long it's going to take to reroute the EPS power flow. Kira calls Odo, telling him that they're going to be there a while longer and they can't say how long. And then Kira throws in a really nice, clunky bit of exposition. By the way, Cardassian turbo lifts run an exposed multi-phase alternating current through their positioning mechanisms.
Excellent.
So don't try to shapeshift your way out. Like that was never going to come up until the moment when the audience is thinking, well, why doesn't Odo just escape? So they have to redesign the lift to make it
Exactly.
possible.
It's something else that we never would have even known if it hadn't been constructed to create an obstacle. It's very clumsily introduced, unfortunately.
It is. I mean, they could have had a problem with it earlier on, and Miles could have said, "Oh, well, the difference between these turbo lifts and ours is that." They could have just thrown it, and I think usually they do. I think in Deep Space Nine they're quite good at signaling early in the episode if there's something that needs to come in later.
Yeah.
But I think again they just kind of didn't care enough to do this, or thought that it was funny enough that Odo only finds out at this moment. Because it is, I think, above everything else, it is meant to be a comedy episode that turns it into a nice, heartwarming episode.
Yes, I think both of those are legitimate observations. It's both comic and convenient for it to happen this way. Yeah, it is just a little bit short-handy. It's a little bit contrived for me, but no, that's fair enough.
But it does also give them an opportunity to have a little bit of dialogue where
Yeah.
Odo responds to Kira over the comm saying, I wouldn't think of it. And Lwaxana says, besides, it wouldn't be polite. And Kira says, I didn't catch that. So Odo repeats, it wouldn't be polite.
And he's
So,
right, actually, it wouldn't be. You can't actually just be like, Ambassador, I'll be right back, but I won't really, because I don't want to come
He
back.
couldn't leave someone alone in a turbo lift.
Exactly, 100%.
But yes, Lwaxana then asks him, do you suppose we're actually in any danger? And he says, not if we remain calm. And she says, well then, we might as well enjoy ourselves. We can take the opportunity to get to know each other. And Odo, he's a really good communicator in this scene. He says, I really prefer to pass the time quietly, which is diplomatic, it's straightforward, it's unambiguous. He's telling her, I would prefer we sit in silence.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the whole thing is just going to be continued. You know it's going to be continued to be played with like this supposed ambassador, mind reader, empath, supposedly very in tune with the people she's working with, ignoring all of that and just steamrolling him. And it's like...
Apart from when she's meant to be trying to find a criminal in the bar, we don't get any mention of the fact that she's empathic and telepathic, which is nice. She doesn't use it to creep on Odo during this episode.
True.
She doesn't pull anything from his mind.
You can absolutely read it that way, yeah.
Yeah. But yes, so Lwaxana says, quietly, of course. And then she looks around for a few moments and says, the quiet man, and Odo gives his standard, increasingly emphatically. A few seconds later, Lwaxana saying, I've always been attracted to quiet men, and you can see Odo's face fall on screen. It's odd, isn't it? But maybe there's more truth than we realise. That old axiom that and Odo silences her with a stern glare.
Yes, I have that in my notes. Odo has run out of delicacy and he's just glaring at Ambassador Troi after asking her to wait quietly. So,
which is effective. It works for a moment. And he hasn't insulted her openly. But yeah, she then frowns and looks down and says, quietly. And then she kind of sinks and sits on the floor. And then just very quietly says, Odo. And he wearily says, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in a very quiet and subdued voice that she says, I don't think I can. And he looks surprised and asks her, can what? And she tells him that he doesn't have to say another word for the whole time they're there, but she thinks that she really needs to talk. And Odo groans, but then he looks back at her and says, I understand. And he squats down beside her, so he's looking at eye level. And he says, there's nothing to be afraid of. And she very cheerfully, bolstering against us, no, of course not. Things could be much worse. And Odo says, really? In a very grouchy voice. And she goes on to tell him about a TNG episode, which has happened presumably not in the far distant past, where she was trapped aboard a Ferengi cargo ship, and it was dreadful, all right, just mildly lamentable. And it was all because of that loathsome Damon. Well, actually, he wasn't altogether loathsome. He was just slightly repulsive, but he did have a certain charm in an insufferable kind of way. Of course, he was totally at the mercy of his uncontrollable passion for me, which means he can't have been all bad now, doesn't it? And I really like it. She had a moment of uncharacteristic vulnerability and then goes straight back into loud and big and boastful and horny. And it's just, the writers really know what they're doing. They're showing her having felt frightened for a moment. And Odo understood that and was with her in that. And then she starts pushing him away again with this. This is how how she manages her anxiety.
Precisely. That's exactly how I read it. Yeah, that this is Lwaxana getting in charge of a situation she's not in control of, because as we've observed many, many times, she's normally the central focus, in charge of the situation. She dictates the social progress of every conversation she's in. Now she can't. She's not in control of anything, really, and she's with somebody who she can't easily bend to her will. So, yeah, I can actually see it as a normal emotional response for her.
Yeah, and she's also at a time when she is trapped and frightened and can't take action. She's remembering a time when she was very much in control, when someone was trying to get the better of her and wasn't managing because she was taking charge in the situation. And that's what she's talking about. And she isn't even, I think, telling Odo about it. She's telling herself about it. 100%. So Odo is starting to disengage again. He's starting to look fed up because she is just rattling on at length, self-soothing with these stories about how much everyone fancies her. And And yeah, she rattles on and says how he was helpless and how it was a matter of total expediency when I made love to him. What are you looking at? Because she's finally noticed that Odo isn't tuning in. And he says, oh, nothing. I was just wondering how many volts are in that exposed circuit. Go on, go on. And yeah, I like it. He's annoyed with her, he's fed up, but there's a bit more empathy from the framing of it for the characters. I think we know now why she is doing this, even if we've only met her for the first time.
Yeah,
we can see what she's doing in this situation and why she's doing it, and it comes from a place of fear. And he is trying his best to remain calm and centered and steady with this very annoying person who's rattling on about this absolute nonsense. And the scene ends by cutting her off mid-sentence. She says, frankly, one thing leads to another, and then it just ends and we cut to the next scene.
So I did like that Odo was therefore clearly learning some, diplomacy and some empathy. He's like, okay, I'm trapped here with this woman, and she does actually clearly need something from me for once, something I can provide, which is an ear, somebody to listen to her. And that's fair enough. And, the Baker Dragon points out that they're now navigating their respective needs and boundaries, which is good. They're working on it. What absolutely threw me for a loop was, yes, she's talking about the events of Lwaxana Troi, which was a TNT episode.
That's the one.
And she says she slept with Damon Togg. Now, I don't know if that was ever implicitly implied in the original TNT episode.
They did Umox, which is a sexual act. So I think that it's quite a progressive definition of making love, that they're saying, okay, it's not necessarily penetrative sex, but she's massaging his ears, which is a sex act to a Ferengi. She's on screen doing that in the episode. So that's my assumption, that that's what she's referring to when she says they made love.
Okay, I will take it. Just
and absolutely... I don't want to picture them doing anything.
I mean, but this is it. And, like a lot of the episode also revolves around Deanna being able to sense her mother. And I just don't want to. I don't want to follow that line any further.
And that was played up in the episode as being both funny and distressing.
I mean, I nipped back, thankfully again to Wikipedia. I nipped back to have a quick scan through the episode synopsis, and they're like, this, that, the other. She's negotiating. There's this, there's that. There's running away, getting captured. Usual TNG fare. Nowhere does it mention anything more than the situation with the Umox. But it does mention several times Deanna sensing her mother's mental state. I was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me, man. I don't. No, come on. Star Trek is progressive and all, but so anyway, I wanted your input on that situation. I won't dwell on it anymore. But you are the
TNG is not in the sector where the sex happens. This is the horny end of the galaxy. Yes, I know the holosuites are always for sex, where Umox is absolutely unambiguously a sex act.
The sexy frontier of the Federation. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Big sexy frontiers of the Federation.
Oh my God, Kat, come on. Right, we must get through the episode now because the wine is clearly impairing us. Back
in Sisko's office. Sisko is now having a one-to-one with Bashir, and he's being just as useless as he was with Odo.
Right, exactly.
Think of this as an opportunity, Doctor. You never know when a friendly ambassador is going to be in the right place at the right time to help your career. And Bashir responds, another hour with them could destroy my career.
Ding, ding, ding.
It's a simple job. Just keep them happy and away from me. And I've put again in my notes, we need some background on why Sisko is so fed up and avoidant in this episode. It's just, I feel like he's had a poor night's sleep. The lights are malfunctioning in his quarters. The replicators made the coffee wrong. Just something to explain why he's shrugging everything off today. But yeah, I like Bashir's response here. Simple, nothing makes them happy. They are dedicated to being unhappy and to spreading that unhappiness wherever they go. They are the ambassadors of unhappy.
I made a note here. Yes, a legendary Tellarite goth band from the 23rd century.
Yes! That one I really do want on a t-shirt. That'd be amazing. Yeah. But yes, Sisko laughs joyfully at this.
He does, doesn't he?
It's not like it's quite a chuckle. It's a loud, big. What the heck, Sisko? He says that all of us have these assignments. As a matter of fact, Cousin Dax used to take perverse pleasure in assigning me to take care of VIP guests. And Bashir says, so now you take the same perverse pleasure in doing it to me. And Sisko says, exactly. So Bashir asked when Sisko finally graduated from this sort of assignment. And Sisko says, the day I hit one of the guests. And I've made note that, yeah, he punches Q, but I felt that was meant to be wildly out of character. That was him pushed to his absolute limit. And we're about to talk about a historic instance of sexual harassment here. Sisko says, quite a brushing off manner, it was a simple misunderstanding over his attempt to coax a young ensign to his quarters against her will. I've put in my notes, so he does understand power dynamics and how they work when the genders are reversed.
That's a really good point.
Again, it's a young female ensign, so he well understood that it was wrong of this man to try and get her back to his quarters by whatever means he was using. So I think the implied thing here is that Sisko was right to punch the guy. He was absolutely in the wrong. But yeah, it just plays very oddly against the current case of sexual harassment that he is completely ignoring among his staff, just assuming that Odo is mature enough, is man enough, perhaps, to manage it, whereas that young female ensign wasn't.
Yeah, 100%. That's what it is, and it is just this episode like arcs so weirdly between quite good writing and just really poor, lazy, troporific 90s troporific values.
I think that's it. It does just feel very dated. I think I think humor more than anything else dates strangely and differently. And yeah, I think it's the way that he puts it very shortly, and I think he's right too. I think it's right not to dwell on it here in the episode. It isn't the focus of the scene at all. It's just to explain what would have been enough to press him to punch someone. I was just
going to point out that again, we're also skirting around this risk. Which is that it creates a diplomatic incident. As Sisko talks about how, Curzon was thankfully forgiving of the fact that Sisko crossed a VIP. And Sisko says, I'm probably not as accommodating as Curzon, so don't actually punch the guests.
Yeah.
But, look after them, keep them away from me. I think also the implication being that he doesn't want to see the ambassadors because they're annoying and punch provocative.
Yeah, and there is that further implication that the ambassadors can get away with anything if someone doesn't stop them.
It's such a weird jumble of just shit we would not take at all anymore. And out there, they're playing it for like this weird mix of, comedy and power dynamics that you just accept. It's really, really
the CEO's here. He's a lech. We know this. No.
Oh my God, you can't.
This is however many 100 years into our future. Please, can things be better then?
You're meant to be the progressive show, right? Come on. So, yeah.
Aye.
Again, a very jarring scene. Very, very jarring. Good. I liked Sadiq Al-Fadl's acting in the scene. I think he very convincingly came across as aggravated, challenged, frustrated, really striving to be professional, but also, out of his depth. I thought he was great in it. I thought he was great. It was just the right. Sisko was just really poor.
I love the energy he brings to Bashir pretty much at all times. He just brings, huge expansive gestures, a lot of movement. He puts a lot of passion into Bashir, and this was a great scene of him being, just really frustrated and willing to vent that frustration to his manager because he trusts him, because he's normally better than this.
And would want some support, and he's just not getting it. He's getting really unhelpful advice and really quite alarming anecdotes. Brilliant. Thanks, boss.
Yeah. Sisko really is just a hands-off parent in this episode. It's just, they'll sort themselves out. They'll learn from the experience. It'll be good for them. But yes, Bashir then leaves, and O'Brien asks if he can talk to Sisko. O'Brien is confused because the computer rerouted the EPS flow in less than an hour, which is not what he expects from this machine. But it hasn't activated the turbo lift circuits. Don't ask me why. O'Brien says, I want you to listen to something. Computer, analyze OPS 02 sensor readings. The computer says all sensors read between 14.3 and 14.4 KSC. And Sisko just shrugs and stares at him. O'Brien has the computer restart the shields, which it does. And O'Brien asks if he can hear it, that the computer's voice, it's not the same attitude. Sisko says it sounds like the computer, which frankly it does.
It does to us.
The computer's attitude isn't any different because it hasn't been uppity in any other episode.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
It just it doesn't fit. What he's telling us is happening. It feels as if it's all happening in O'Brien's head.
God, yeah, it does.
But yes, O'Brien then gives a lovely example of working with different computers. He says that working with the Enterprise computer was like dancing a waltz. With this computer, it's always been like a wrestling match till we started downloading that probe. I'm like, no, it was like a wrestling match for about 10 minutes at the start until everything returned to normal when you downloaded the damn probe.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think the only thing I have to go on is that O'Brien has always been written as a very perceptive engineer. He clearly knows his stuff. He's been a miracle worker several times in the show already. So, yeah, he's saying it. I'm going to take it as word because, yeah, I can't pick up at all what he's talking about. I have nothing to go on.
There's something of, if we've been watching this, I mean, I've been watching this an episode a fortnight, but we're doing a deep dive into it. I'm rewatching, making notes. If I'd been watching it casually on a week-by-week basis, I might just take him at his word. Just if he says the computer's been difficult, it probably has.
Yeah.
So it fits. It just feels like a missed opportunity because it was at this point in my notes that I said you could have a HAL situation here, a computer that is playing up, that won't do what it's told. It could have been a big part of their life, and it isn't. It hasn't been, and he's trying to pretend it is now. But yeah, O'Brien says there's one other crazy thing that he's almost afraid to mention to Sisko, that every time he leaves, something happens to bring him back. It's almost like the computer doesn't want me to leave it alone. I've put, first of all, how the fuck does he notice when stuff breaks every episode? But secondly, there's no visual indication of this. Again, give the man a sandwich. Have O'Brien walk over to a different desk, pick up his sandwich, and have an alarm go off on the other side of the room, which he has to attend to. He deals with that. He comes back. An alarm goes off for a different part of the station. Just give us some visual indication on screen, other than O'Brien telling us that it happened.
Show don't tell is like, it's 101 out of fiction. Of making a TV show, of any kind of visual entertainment.
It is, and Deep Space Nine is usually really good at it. They do have in-depth conversations about the technology where they can't show it. They have different hypotheticals. They're normally really intelligent with it. And here it feels like one man's imaginings because we haven't been shown any of it. And all it would have taken would be one sandwich and one alarm. It wouldn't have cost them much.
It really wouldn't. It really wouldn't. But no, all I can think is they must have scrapped a lot of those kind of scenes to give more scenes to dialogue moments with more of the cast.
So they've just kind of given Colm Meaney a bit more dialogue to catch up on what's been happening while we've been looking at the turbo lift.
I did notice he has a lot in this episode, which I enjoy. I think Colm Meaney's great. I love Chief O'Brien's character. But I did notice he had a lot to say, not do. And even the doing is just pushing buttons on a panel, which isn't. Which
again, they're usually very good at avoiding. They're good at, and they showed us the Akudagram earlier on. They showed us what was on the panel, but yeah, it's a lot of a man working at a computer and telling us what he's doing. It's not very satisfying to watch.
It's not. It's a trap Star Trek falls into too easily, and they need to do something to escape that kind of trap, and they don't in this episode. Again, I think we're gonna have to put a lot down to just really cut to the bone writing. Just really sharp. Lack of anything.
But yes, Sisko says, you almost make it sound like a child, because that's the theme for this subplot of the episode. Anyway, exterior of Deep Space Nine, the probe is turning 500 meters away. I think we've got an image of it floating off the outer ring of Deep Space Nine.
Deep Space Nine. Yes, I think there's a great panning shot as well, like under the plane of the station, and it comes up over the.
Nice.
I've got it in my notes because I always notice when they do something different with the model shot, and I think they panned up and gave it a nice angle. So yes, getting to this scene was just a lovely pan over the station.
And now we get a station log supplemental. Odo and Ambassador Troi remain trapped in Turbo Lift 4, which is an inconsistency. I went back and checked.
It was Turbo Lift 7. Wasn't it?
Yes, exactly. I went back and I listened again. Odo says that they are in Turbo Lift 7. Here, Sisko says Turbo Lift 4. There's no reason for that. None whatsoever.
That is.
Also, it's Pylon 3. Wouldn't it be Turbo Lift 3 just for consistency? No, it isn't. No, it's just so unusual that kind of inconsistency crops into a. I mean, if every single episode were full of these inconsistencies, we just have to glance over them. It'd be boring. I'm only picking up on it because it's so rare that it happens. It's remarkable. But yes.
I think that's a really good point, actually, because there was... I remember growing up and reading The Nitpicker's Guide to the Next Generation, which took every episode and broke it down into continuity errors, prop malfunctions, loads of things like that. And
good, this was setting you up to be lots of fun at parties, Tim.
thank you for enabling my podcast to vent these horrors on you and the internet. And it's you who noticed. It's you. So don't project your feelings onto me when it is you who
Sorry,
spotted.
young Tim. You were saying.
Just that I'd read books that noticed this, and it does happen. But I'd never gotten into it for Deep Space Nine. I didn't even realize they have done one for Deep Space Nine, so I will have to get it.
Wow.
But you have christened and inaugurated the nitpicking subsection of Deep Space Wine, which we will now have to honour every episode. Whenever we notice a discontinuity, we shall have to note it.
The actually part of the
I think you'll find that was a different turbo lift.
We're the best kind of nerds.
Please, take us on, please.
After the station's log supplemental, we cut to Ops, where Dax, Kira, O'Brien, and Sisko are discussing the problem. Dax asks, what if it's some kind of non-biological life form we've never seen before? And Kira says, you're suggesting someone left a baby at our doorstep. Dax says they haven't been able to communicate directly with it. O'Brien says they've communicated indirectly. It is now linked to and is part and parcel of their computer. Dax said they haven't yet determined whether it's sentient. And Kira says, maybe more like a stray puppy that's attached itself to you, Chief. On the one hand, I've made in my notes, I've said that on the one hand, I really like that everyone believes O'Brien. No one is questioning his judgment when it comes to the computer.
That's true.
But on the other hand, we need more to show us this. We can't just have O'Brien saying, it keeps calling me back. There are always problems, O'Brien. You sound paranoid, man.
Absolutely. And I know Star Trek loves breaking down a complex technical situation into a clumsy metaphor such as a baby at a doorstep or a pet puppy. They raced through this so quickly that I just felt completely removed. I still don't even entirely understand what's going on at this point. And you're now saying, it's like a puppy.
The first time I watched this, I just glanced over this subplot completely because it wasn't interesting. Because it's got nothing to show us. There's a freaking probe outside the station. It doesn't interact with them at all. Nope. It makes the computer work better, and that's it.
That's it. And you're like saying this is bad, and I'm like, I don't get it.
And also, I don't know. Odo mentioned whatever it was, Tracehound early on, but we're suddenly expected to believe that. But again, sounds like a terrible joke setup. I'm really sorry that we happen to have an Irishman here. We've got O'Brien, a Bajoran, a Trill, various other members of staff. They all know what an Earth puppy is and what that represents and how they act. Yeah. They're from different planets and cultures. How the heck are they going to get there? That's not a shared metaphor. That's not something you often have aboard a spaceship.
No. The plot has again been written so narrowly and tightly that they want to use that as a metaphor that we will get. We no consideration for internal consistency within the atmosphere, the environment of Deep Space Nine. It makes no sense. It just works to move the plot along.
I wonder whether the other two plots, Bashir with the ambassadors and Odo and Lwaxana in the lift, those are the plots where character is happening, where there is fun stuff going on, where the writer's attention went, where their attention to detail went. Yeah. I wonder whether this part of the plot was mandated by the producers that we have to introduce this probe in this episode. This is how we want it to happen. Because the probe is now integrated. If the probe is never frickin' mentioned again, if that PUP sub-processor is never mentioned again, I'm going to be distressed because it's part of the computer now. It is part of the station. It is serving a function, and it feels like it's just been written in functionally. That's what it feels like. The staff just have to say everything in the right order to make us know that this has happened.
That's essentially it, because I'll tell you something now that's just occurred to me that never did. They never mentioned the probe itself again. They talk about getting the program...
Now that they've downloaded the...
Yeah, and they talk about trying to get it back onto the probe.
Oh.
And then, obviously, I'm going to jump ahead here and say the resolution is they end up, giving it a little space in the computer to play. They never talk about the probe itself ever again, or what they're going to do with this utterly alien piece of hardware.
And it's not going to be there next episode.
Oh, they'll never mention this again at all. It is so... You're right, it is literally just a mechanism to push the story along, and that is so lazy. I came into this episode feeling like it was all right. It was a bottle episode with some good characterization. You open my eyes to how disappointing it actually is.
Oh no, Tim, no. You started out with shining-eyed enthusiasm and I've broken your spirit.
You have opened my eyes. I was once blind, but now can see. And that is what a good podcast should do. A good podcast should take the episode apart and be like, well, why? Well, why? Well, why? We are canny viewers. We want reasons. We want justification. We want internal consistency. And we don't get a lot of that in this episode.
Spider-Man.
So thank you, Kat. I've rabbited on enough. Where were we?
Right, so yes, they've decided that it's a puppy.
Yeah.
Sisko says, whatever it is, it's slowly disabling our station. O'Brien says that it arrived, that yes, the problems arrived when they downloaded the files from the probe. If they upload the files back to the probe, it might leave with them.
Okay.
Dax asks, what if it's fully integrated itself with our computer? And O'Brien says, no, that'd be more like a virus. He sees no evidence that it's trying to overwrite or destroy anything. He thinks it just creates connections with the areas of the computer that are active. And Dax says, almost as if it feeds off the energy of the computer functions. O'Brien says that transferring its programming off the station might solve the problem. So Sisko nods at his staff twice because he can't say "make it so." That's what I've put in my notes.
I would write my notes, and then the scene moved on, and I'm like, did I miss Sisko saying something? And I rolled it back, and I'm like, oh, he didn't.
He looks around him, he just nods at the staff in two different directions, and that carries on. They just didn't give him a line at that point. Sisko then asks Kira how long it's been since they've heard from Odo. Comlines are still down. He's been in the turbo lift almost 4 hours. Sisko, who is now a good manager, asks if Kira knows the schedule of Odo's regenerative cycle. And Kira says, my God, I've no idea. Again with the God.
Yes.
But if he doesn't get back to his pail in time, and the music and Sisko's expression tell us that this would be bad. So we now cut to external Deep Space Nine and then to O'Brien at his computer console. O'Brien is uploading all probe command sequences back to the probe, and we've got Image 7 O'Brien at the computer console. And Colm Meaney does a really good job of saying psychobabble while tapping his fingers realistically at this disparate computer control. It's really good. It's just really nicely choreographed. It looks natural. It doesn't look like when you've got someone sitting at a QWERTY keyboard doing this in office scenes. It actually looks like he's doing things.
And he does have some god-awful lines to say as well about restarting protocols and re-engaging the subspace transmitter. Mention of subspace.
Hey!
So yeah, it's a good scene. It is something that Colm Meaney is good at, but I imagine the actor himself, he probably resents having to say this crap and push buttons on a plexiglass strip of plastic. But he is good at it. I'm sorry, Colm, you are good at it.
Sorry, dude. Yes. O'Brien tries again to complete the requested function because the computer tells him it can't be done. Please abort and retry. He does this. Sisko walks up behind him, and then the lights go off. And O'Brien says, it's not as easy as I thought it would be, Commander. We then look to a corridor where there are lots of people walking slowly around, cautiously in the low light, which is quite nice.
On the promenade.
They are, yes, you're right. It's a wide corridor, it's the promenade. Bashir and the ambassadors of Unhappy are walking along the promenade. Taxco asks if it is just the lights or the heat, or if the heat is affected as well, because she hasn't brought any warm clothing. And Bashir assures them that this will just be temporary. Lojal, the Vulcan ambassador, has been reading O'Brien's reports, and he said he had the impression that he was a competent engineer. And Bashir says, Chief O'Brien, one of the best in Starfleet. And Lojal then asks why the backup systems are not functioning. And I've put, Bashir's back on his bullshit. And he says, well, out here on the edge of the frontier is just one adventure after another.
Yeah.
Which is more or less a line word for that he said in the first episode. Here on the outer edges of the frontier medicine.
I hadn't even thought that. It is meant to be a parallel of that, isn't it? Oh, I'd not even
I think
thought that.
It may be that this was meant to be a very early episode and they pushed it back by a few so as to get different interactions between the cast.
I think so. I did like at least that Bashir stuck up for his attempted friend. He did, and importantly, as we noted last episode, even though Bashir is obsessed with Dax, when he mentions her and stands up for her in this episode earlier on, he doesn't mention that he fancies her. No.
He isn't a one-note character in that. That isn't mentioned. You could watch this episode and not know that he had any particular fondness for Dax.
Which is as it should be. They are colleagues. They should support each other. And Judge Dax is a brilliant science officer. Chief O'Brien is a great engineer. They are good at what they're doing, So it is right. That should happen. It's just I feel now we're desperately seizing at the straws of good characterization in this episode.
I think that there's also something of don't overlook the stuff that they do well, because it's very easy to write this stuff in a very tropey, very irritating Ross from Friends kind of way. He has no character except that he is a paleontologist bloody hell, he's a really shocking paleontologist. And he fancies Rachel. He has no, and he's a father. He's like Worf, though, a father occasionally when it suits him.
When it suits the plot.
And he has a lesbian ex-wife. But he's not a complex character. He's not well written. Bashir has far few adjectives that you can apply to him, but he's nicely, roundly written. He's shown doing his job, shown interacting with his crewmates in a variety of different ways. It is nice, and I want to appreciate that, because they could have done it differently.
Quite right.
But yes, we're now back in the turbo lift. Yes, Odo and Lwaxana are both sitting on the floor together, and Odo is looking a bit shinier than usual.
Yes.
And Lwaxana says, "But enough about me. Tell me about yourself." And Odo says, "I'm really a private man." And she says, "Yes, of course you are. Is that hair real?" And he says, "It is real in that it's me. It's not real hair." And she's taking a deep interest in this. "How did you do it, your hair?" And he says, "It took a great deal of practice." "You studied hairstyles?" And Odo very wearily says, "If you must know." And yes, we've got Odo backstory incoming.
I know.
Yes, facts that we haven't had previously.
It's characterization. It's great. I did like this. I did like this. Yes, please.
And you're right. It is because Lwaxana is willing to ask him questions. She wants to know more about him. She doesn't just take as read that, oh yeah, he just shapes his hair. It's just part of him. She wants to know how and why and get some conversation out of it. And he says that he imitated the hairstyle of the Bajoran man who was assigned to him. And she says, "Assigned?" And he says, "To study me at the research center. He was a scientist." So she asks, "You mean that's how you grew up? In the laboratory?" And she looks distressed by the idea. She's got a frowning and a mouth open in concern as she's listening to him. And he says, "I did not grow up as you think of it. It was merely a transition from what I used to be to what I learned to become," which is it's more than we've had from Odo, I think.
A lot more.
So far. We've known that he's alone in the universe as a shapeshifter, but yeah, this idea of him being in a lab, being studied, not being socialized, it makes a lot of sense. Lwaxana sighs and shakes her head and says, "It sounds very lonely to me." And I think that at this moment, Odo sees that she's empathizing with him.
Yes.
She's not being manipulative. She isn't doing the frickin' Lwaxana Troi thing of, "I sense a loneliness in you." At a moment when someone's pretty much said, "I feel lonely." "Oh, I'm sensing a strong feeling from you right now." She's not doing that. She's just saying, "Well, that sounds to me like that would be a lonely thing."
Yeah.
And he replies, "I was always very self-sufficient." And she says, "I'm sure you had to be to survive being so different from everyone else." And I love how she delivers that line. As if she is thinking carefully about how to phrase it. She's thinking about what it was like for him and how to express that. It doesn't feel as if the line was sitting there ready to be delivered. She's working it out. And to show Lwaxana taking such care over her words, after she's had such a stream of verbiage earlier, she can just talk fluently off the top of her head, not caring, not really listening. And that's not what she's doing now. It's a really beautiful bit of acting, and I really appreciate it.
There is, again, that sincerity in her tone, which I clocked earlier, and you detect that difference, as you say, from her verbiage or earlier. She's engaged in this conversation, and she's actually asking the questions we would ask. We want to know. We know so little about Odo's past at this point. And you are suddenly like, oh, wow, Odo grew up in a research centre. And you suddenly think, well, yeah, I suppose he must have. When he was first encountered by whoever first encountered him, they wouldn't have known what he was, because shapeshifters are so rare in the Star Trek galaxy. And I was immediately engaged with this. I thought she handled it with empathy, sympathy. It's finally at this point, I think the episode swings very much in her favour. So I was very pleased this happened.
Definitely. The Indoor Cat said that this conversation is both backstory and has potential for being deeply philosophical.
Agreed. Really good. Really good.
And yeah, and in terms of TNG backstory, this is the part of Lwaxana that Deanna has inherited, the sensitive part, the part that can listen when she's not going, "Oh, I sense something." But Odo now looks as if he's struggling. Oh, we've got an image of Odo and Lwaxana in the turbo lift at the moment, if we want to picture how they are together. But Odo looks as if he's struggling. He's drooping his head. And he calls ops twice, sounding very impatient, and then says, "Comm lines are still down," and he's clearly agitated in the way he holds himself and moves. Lwaxana asks, "Are you all right? You look warm." And he says, "It's nothing, I'm fine." So she picks up the thread again. "I can't imagine how it must have been And she says, you know, if it bothers you to talk about this,
Yeah.
she's absolutely doing the right thing. She's
Yes.
checking it out with him. She's not just blustering forward anymore. She knows how to do this. She usually chooses not to.
This is it, yeah. And I think she's confined with Odo, and she's finally reading him and going, he's above and beyond him being uncomfortable in the situation or uncomfortable with me, he's uncomfortable about this topic, like a really perceptive person should be. I am treading on something that is quite, sensitive for this person to review, discuss, and experience again. And I thought that was really touching.
But Odo says, not at all. What was it like? I guess you could say I was the life of the party.
Oh.
This is an important bit of the conversation.
Yes.
I enjoyed this bit. And she says, I don't think I understand. She's just gently asking him to continue. And he says, my way of trying to fit in, I found I could be entertaining. Odo, be a chair. I'm a chair. Odo, be a razor cat. I'm a razor cat. Life of the party. Incidentally, this is the only mention that razor cats get other than in One Deep Space Nine.
Of course it is.
But also at this moment, every weird child who developed party tricks to try and fit in with their peers is pointing at the screen and going, oh my God, yes, that is me. That is what you do. If you are weird and you don't fit in easily with your peers, you learn how to do things to get their approval. And it's so much in such a short bit of description of what Odo's early life was like, explaining why he's now so reserved and what he's experienced. And while he's saying all of this, Lwaxana is actually smiling until Odo's next line when he says, I hate parties. And then she drops her smile and says, well, perhaps you've been going to the wrong ones. Come to one of mine, Odo. I'll make sure that all the guests are there to entertain you. And it's just really sweet.
It is.
Just when he was talking about being the life of the party, she thought that was a very positive thing, that he was talking about a time he'd enjoyed. As soon as she realizes it wasn't, she switches tack and she's like, well, I do enjoy parties. We're going to do this differently for you in the future. It's lovely. It's caring. It's sweet. She's not trying to seduce him anymore. No. She's not. You don't get the impression that she's trying to do this with the intention of getting into bed with him.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, she's seen him vulnerable and she cares about him now and wants to talk about it.
It is wonderful. And I love that parallel you drew as well about everybody, who has to create a mechanism to deal with those kind of social situations, which I think probably, without wanting to stereotype, rings true with a lot of Star Trek fans who have been watching this and thinking, or perhaps wouldn't have even known what it would be like at a party, but viewed it with trepidation, fear, worry. Yeah, that felt very, very, very real. And it helped build sympathy to a character who we've never known very much about. And in this few lines of dialogue, it was great. It gave both characters a chance to really flourish, develop themselves, explore a situation we all felt a certain bitter experience with. Yeah, it was gorgeous. How weird to find it in the midst of all of this clumsy writing. And you just think...
But I think that's it. This is where their focus was. This was their pride of the episode. The lift scenes are the shining gem, and the rest of it gets relatively short shrift, I think.
Good call. Love that description. I think you're absolutely spot on. What a shame.
But yes, at this point, when Lwaxana said that she'll make sure the guests at her parties are there to entertain him, Odo looks at her with great effort. And I think at that point he wants to respond, but he's too physically weak. He groans and he falls forward. And then he explains to her, he's told her that he turns into a liquid every 15 hours. This is our 15.
Yes.
And she sits close against him and just puts an arm around his shoulder and kind of looks into her. Not in an inappropriate way at all. It's just a show of warmth. I
immediately got this is solidarity, this is affection, this is compassion for somebody suffering. I didn't get any weird vibe off it that we did in his office earlier. So yeah, I'm pleased how this was telegraphed. It was telegraphed believably and not all weird. So I was very grateful for that moment.
And moving on, we're backing up. So O'Brien is at a computer console. Kira, Dax, and Sisko are in the background. O'Brien estimates that we can get all of the probe's files manually transferred to the 6 isolinear rods in less than 60 seconds. And isolinear rods are what Quark used to access information on the computer in episode 5, Babel. So we have prior for isolinear rods being used to store information aboard the station. O'Brien asks the computer to run a level 1 diagnostic of all power systems on board. The computer says requested function will require 43 minutes. stand by. And we've got a couple of nice images of Anara crouching beside O'Brien and working on the isolinear rods in the computer drive.
They look great. I'll just say again.
Beautiful prop, and I don't know if it'll ever be seen again.
I suspect not. Yeah.
But at this point, I'd earlier in the episode, I'd said I thought that they could have had a kind of HAL Space 2001.
Yes, I made the exact same observation.
And this is exactly what they're doing here. They have. I don't think they telegraph very well that this is what they were doing before they start. But what they're doing is giving the computer busy work so that the computer has to respond to them verbally and so that its processing power will be used up and it will slow down. It's a HAL Daisy scene.
Exactly.
So Dax So Dax asks the computer to create a historical database for all known wormhole activity. The computer is stuttering a little bit. It says indicate time parameters. Dax says all known occurrences. The computer is slower and glitching. Requested function will require subspace link up. And Dax says, in that case, create a subspace link with Neru colony, New France colony, and Corrado 1 transmitter array. And Anara comes in with computer access musical files in the Bajor master data banks and create a concert program of Bajoran Serenas. The computer just grinds to a halt stand by unable to stand, and then suddenly the sparks flashing up from the console, and Dax reads a huge plasma surge in the habitat ring. So we now cut to Bashir and the ambassadors in a dark, blue-lit, relatively narrow corridor in the guest quarters. Vidosia is telling Bashir to tell Sisko that he expects that probe briefing to be held on schedule, lights or no lights. And then suddenly we've got an image of this. A blast of flames rushes along the corridor towards them.
There it is. Dun, dun, dun. And I think a similar effect to the blast that Kira imagined she saw in Wishes Were Horses. Very
definitely.
Similar.
It's the same occurrence in 2 episodes. And they cower, but they're not burnt by it immediately. But back in ops, Kira reports the incident, which has happened in corridor H12, H12A guest quarters. O'Brien says none of the fire suppression systems are coming online. Dax reads 4 life forms in the corridor. So now Sisko comes into action, finally decides he's got to take some damn responsibility for once in his day. Sisko tells O'Brien to send an emergency crew down there. They'll need manual fire gear. And back in the corridor, the ambassadors are crouched, coughing. A fire is burning in the background. Bashir pushes past them all to get to a door, removes a panel over a lever, bangs on the door a few times. It won't open. He tried pulling the lever to get the door open.
The manual release.
Yes. He looks back and, sorry, a little fly just flew at my eye and then off again.
Dear.
Evils. Problems of summer. He pulled at the lever and he looks away from it and sees that the fire is still burning fiercely. The door isn't opening. The ambassadors are coughing. Everyone's struggling to breathe due to the smoke. Bashir starts coughing and it fades to black. The next scene, we've got Sisko and Kira in a station corridor. Sisko says phases at maximum. They blast presumably at the other side of the door, which Bashir could not get to open. A small patch of the door melts slightly and becomes reflective as if the metal has been slightly tarnished. And Kira says, Terranium inlay, Cardassian design. I should have guessed. We're going to need a bipolar torch to get through it. And I've noted that Terranium will be mentioned again in an episode in season 3, but we'll never see another bipolar torch.
Of course not. I also noted in my notes that none of the colonies that Dax suggests the computer link up with will be mentioned again. So there you go. Just a really, really, really hard world building in this episode and never using any of it again. There we go.
These writers just quietly hoping that these things would be mentioned again and they'd get writers' royalties.
Exactly, and it does not. Nor does the bipolar torch get used again, which sounds like it might be more used in psychology, but I can see this.
It sounds like something that fires out on both ends. It doesn't sound useful.
Absolutely.
But yeah, sneaky writers shoving in as many references as they can in the hope that someone will get picked up later for royalties.
I think that's exactly what it is.
Anyway, yes, Sisko tells one of their emergency team to tell, I don't know why he does. Instead of calling Ops himself, Sisko says, if they can't get the fire suppression systems online, we're going to lose our people. And then he just tells this person what to do.
I thought the implication was that the communication system isn't currently working, and that's why they can't speak.
It comes down, so they're sending someone to run up there.
I think so. It's never properly. I know at one point they lose contact with Odo in the turbo lift, But it's
You're right. I
never.
think that's it, because the person is standing behind camera. We hear someone say, "Aye, sir," but we don't see someone leaving the scene to tell them. I think you're right. That's just me not picking up on that.
Absolutely. Oh, Lieutenant Indoor Cat has flagged that it is 10:15. We've been going for 2 hours 15 minutes.
Oh my goodness, we're getting very close to the end of the episode. My temptation is to carry on. Indoor Cat, if you do need to leave and get some sleep,
100%.
please do. You're in a different time zone than us, and I don't want you to be unrested on your morrow.
I would absolutely agree with that. Thanks for everybody who's spotted us so far, but Kat and I will continue, and all of this will be available on YouTube because I cannot edit any of this down. So it all goes up in.
Anyone that needs to get to bed so that you can go to work tomorrow, please do. You can pick us up afterwards. So as we burn the midnight oil, we're back in ops with O'Brien at the console. And O'Brien says, "It's not paying any attention to me." Again, the idea that this is all in O'Brien's head. It just seems so likely to me right now. But Dax says, "I guess it just doesn't want to leave, like a scared puppy." And O'Brien says, "We have no idea how long that probe was tumbling through space. Maybe years with that life form alone on board. It's sort of like shutting a puppy in a room, you know. I had a pup once. If I had to lock him up, he'd scratch forever at the door, trying to get out." But you're right, they're just really going hard on this freaking analogy that doesn't
really
work.
They are hammering it with a lack of subtlety that I don't accept from Star Trek. Star Trek writers are usually very good at gently introducing this and letting you work it out. They've just thrown this at us with no backup, and they're just going to keep slamming our heads against it until we accept that that's what we're doing.
And because it's a computer program, there's nothing visual to show us. They haven't got a representation of it on the screen even. It's just people talking about computers. Yes, Dax says, "I'm not sure I know what you're getting at." And O'Brien says, "Pups don't like to be left alone. They like attention." And Dax says, "Well, this one's certainly getting a lot of it." So O'Brien says, "That's right. No wonder it doesn't want to leave." And I'm like, none of this makes any computer sense. It doesn't make programming sense. It doesn't make artificial life form sense. It makes sense for a puppy, but that's something they have imposed on it. It just feels so freaking clunky. I hate it. I hate it so much.
I understand.
But yes, O'Brien decides that he's got to build a doghouse. And he doesn't give us any more analogy for that. He doesn't say, "I'll create a framework in which it can sit within the network." No, it's just a doghouse. That's what it is.
Straight in with the metaphor with none of the technobabble beforehand. It's completely backwards to how Star Trek's meant to do this and let you understand what the hell's going on. So, yeah, makes sense.
And it's just so unlike Deep Space Nine, where they throw a lot of technobabble in, but they do differential hypotheses. They make it clear, but they sound as if they are scientists talking about science. They don't sound as if they're talking down to someone who would describe. There's no one in the room that needs to hear that it's a puppy, apart apparently from Miles O'Brien. Anyway, back in the turbo lift.
Yes.
Odo has his back to the camera and is breathing heavily, and we can see that the skin on the back of his neck looks red and melty. I think that the makeup team have done a really good job of this because they have to have something that looks as if it's liquid but will stay on his face for takes and retakes. So it's just a really nice prosthetic. He tries calling ops again, it doesn't work, and he whimpers with pain. And Lwaxana says, "Odo, turn around." And he says, "I can't, it's beginning." And she gently says, "It's all right." He replies, "You don't understand. No one has ever seen me like this before." And she again very gently says, "Not even the scientist who was assigned to you." And he explains that was different. It was only research to him. And she says, "But you don't have to be ashamed with me." And he says, "I'm not ashamed. It's a private matter, that's all." So she, perfect question, asks him, "How can I make it easier for you?"
I liked that. I like that she asked that. Like any human being would do, which is, okay, empathize, how can I make the situation better for you, someone suffering? And I got to admit as well, I very much bumped on Rene Auberjonois' expression of pain. It's not something we hear Odo do very much at all. He's always so collected, very sure of himself. It's such a striking difference. And I think it is, again, testament to the very lamented and late Rene Auberjonois to portray Odo as suddenly this very vulnerable, pained person. It really, really hit me. I was like,
absolutely. Wow. We've got an image actually of Odo's face in this.
Let me bring that up.
Which we could get up now.
There we go.
But he's doing whole body acting throughout this scene. I can only imagine that the actor was extremely tense while doing it because he's shaking slightly, he's holding himself crouched. He's putting a lot of work into showing us that Odo is in a lot of physical discomfort right now. He's physically trying to hold his form together, which is something that a human being can only imagine what that would feel like.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yes, this shot is followed by another one, where Odo says, you can't make it easy for me, I'm fine. And then another object moves into shot.
Let me bring that up there. There it is. It is.
And Lwaxana has taken off her wig and just handed it to him. And without turning around, Odo asks, what is that? And Lwaxana from off screen says, my hair. The next shot I think that we've got is what Odo sees when he turns around. He turns to look at her, and wonderfully we stay with the same camera. We don't cut to another shot, but that camera twists slightly to show over his shoulder Lwaxana standing there with her arm held out, holding the wig, and her own short, dark hair was underneath it. And she very gently says, no one's ever seen me like this. And he says, why? It looks fine. And she shakes her head and says, it looks ordinary. I've never cared to be ordinary. So you see, Odo, even we non-shapeshifters have to change who we are once in a while. And she's deliberately made herself vulnerable in front of him. We've never seen Lwaxana without her. We've seen her in her quarters with Mr. Hom, with various suitors. We've never seen her without a wig on. And it's a beautiful moment for the character and the actress.
It is. It's this weird, heartfelt sincerity of a brilliantly written scene amidst just absolutely chaotic writing for the rest of the episode. I just can't understand how these two things together, except, as you said, that they focused all of their attention on these great scenes to the lack of writing in the rest of the episode, which is so imbalanced and not something I would associate with Star Trek normally. So very unusual.
I also don't know what the dynamics are between two writers writing together. I think some people will will kind of draw outlines of scenes separately, then come together and do the dialogue, or they'll each write their scenes in full and then discuss whether they match together well. I wonder whether Michael Piller, the more experienced Star Trek writer, took it upon himself to write the character-based scenes. And the poor other guy, what was it, Don Dunaway?
That sounds right, yes.
Yes, whether Don Dunaway was left writing the op scenes. I don't know, it's just pontification on my part, but it does feel so jarringly uneven, just the quality of the different scenes. Really but I am really glad that we got these scenes in this episode. They shine out, and we don't have to pay much attention to the scenes around it, which don't have much of a bearing on anything. I've now lost where I was for looking at Don Dunaway.
Yes, no worries.
Now we're back in the turbo lift. Odo is melting further, and he says, "You are not at all what I expected." And Lwaxana replies, "No one's ever paid me a greater compliment." It's so sweet. They wrote some really key lines into this dialogue, and they hit perfectly.
Heartfelt sincerity from two characters who I think have spent a lot of time concealing their true selves. So it's great. It's a real good situation. Love it.
And I think it's really nicely done, because we've had quite a few episodes where we've had characters in DS9 interacting with each other, getting to know each other, determining what the dynamics are going to be for them going forward. This is a scene between a very well-known Star Trek character, Sana, who's been in a lot of TNG episodes. She's very easily identifiable, even if you don't like her. And a completely new character, Odo, who's only been here for a few episodes. And they've written, I think, one of the most moving scenes of the show so far.
Oh, agreed. 100%, yeah.
And I think to bring two characters together who have no history together, who don't necessarily have a great deal in common, who are very much at odds with each other early in the episode, is very, very neatly set up. It's in character for both of them, and it works. And it would have been so easy to get that wrong. It would have been so easy just for it to feel forced and fake when they're in the turbo lift. But it's both the delicacy of the acting and the writing. They match each other perfectly in this. And I'm just really impressed with how well they did it. Because there's one episode, it's characters that haven't met before. I believe they will meet again, but I haven't watched forward to find out.
No spoilers, but to my recollection, no, they do not.
Seriously. God damn it. But yeah, so I just want to know that we're frustrated that the rest of the episode is not as good as this, but this is uncommonly good writing and acting. It's a shining star in the episode. I absolutely love it.
Exactly, and we are going to seize at it. As I said earlier, we are seizing at these straws of good moments in this episode, and there's nothing wrong with that. We enjoyed this. We both thoroughly enjoyed this moment. And at that point, I believe Lwaxana Troi says to Odo, "Just let go." I think are her exact words.
Let go. I'll take care of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the next image in our bank of images for this episode is Odo melting into a puddle of goo and Lwaxana catching him in her skirt.
And it's wonderful. It's a wonderfully vulnerable scene from our shapeshifter, who we've seen, incredibly capable with his talent. He can turn into anything. He can morph himself so weapons pass through him. Incredible, powerful, and this is the most vulnerable we've ever seen him. So it's a wonderfully contrasting image all of a sudden.
And we as an audience haven't seen him before when he needs to revert to liquid form and can't do it. There is a great sense of urgency there, and that has been well set up. That's been mentioned in several previous episodes. We know that that's the case, but this is the first time when it's become urgent that happened. And I really do appreciate that was properly set up, because it could just have been invented for this episode, and it wasn't. It sits well within the canon of DS9 so far, and it means that the tension and then the release when he is able to go into liquid form and she is there for him. It's beautiful, the most beautiful use of the world that's been created and the characters in it, and of long-standing. It's just beautifully done. I love it so much.
I do as well, and I think we appreciate it slightly more because it is we've persevered through so much kind of substandard, below par quality that we've gotten here. And we're like, the oasis of enjoyment in this barren desert of really lackluster writing. So I can absolutely appreciate that. And yes.
But the next scene, we're back in the corridor where Kira and Sisko are still trying to get through the door, and Sisko's going at it with a blowtorch, which is presumably a bipolar torch for the purposes of the episode. Kira is telling a member of the emergency team to get portable oxygen, all med supplies for treating plasma burns, to prep to evacuate people to Beijo for treatment. This is good Deep Space Nine writing. This is them planning ahead for every contingency. There might be people who are dying on the other side of that door, and they're going to bring everything to bear on it. It's not just get through the door, it's what happens afterwards. Bloody love it. Very nicely done.
And this is what they're meant to be good at. This is them being professionals, dealing with a crisis. It's great. They're finally, in the closing 5-10 minutes of the episode, they're finally acting like the characters we know and have come to admire.
But Sisko is just standing there with a blowtorch.
That is a bit weird.
Who wrote Sisko for this episode? It's just bizarre. But yes, backing up, Anara and O'Brien. There's a note in the shooting script saying that O'Brien finishes what he's doing, excited with purpose. And O'Brien tells the computer to analyze the subprogram labeled POP. The computer does this. Requested subprogram is a series of bidirectional data transfer and monitoring commands. O'Brien says, reroute all main computer backup functions through this subprogram. And I'm like, that's a bloody risky gambit, mate. It's an alien program that you've only just encountered. You can't remove it from your station because you've tried. And on a hunch, O'Brien is going to give it complete control of all the backup operations on the station because it's a puppy and he trusts it.
Ugh.
What the fuck?
I didn't notice how much power he'd given it. That's thrown me a bit.
He reroutes everything through that thing.
Right.
And it's just come through the wormhole a few hours ago, and they don't know what it is or what it's capable of. It could be. I just, spies and evil and destruction and. They've characterized it as a puppy, so now it can be given access to everything.
That seems crazy. That does seem crazy. But it is clearly, again, just in the efforts of pushing us towards the plot conclusion. That's ultimately what it is.
Not good enough. I'm terrified for them.
Yeah.
Anyway, once the transfer is complete, it worked. The lights come back up across the station. Everything's fine. Sisko, Kira, and their team are at the door. The corridor is still full of smoke. Dax is on comms and says that fire suppression is responding and all systems back online. Sisko removes the panel on the door and uses the lever to open it. And the next couple of shots were beautiful. I couldn't get a decent picture of the next one, but it's very close to floor level with the camera looking up at Sisko and Kira as they step into the space through the door. They then turn and walk a little to their right where there's a bright light shining through broken pipes, bits of fallen scenery.
A great set, really believable damage. I think also earlier I'd noticed that they'd actually used burning debris, real burning, not the computer-generated fireball, but there's actual burning debris on the set. Great, once again,
they like to set things on fire, and they're going to do it as often as they can. I love that because they've got so much CG stuff going on.
Exactly.
They could have CG'd it in, and they didn't. They want to make things burn. Yeah. I'm here for it. But yes, they turn. The camera's looking at them. They then turn and walk past the camera. And the next scene we have got one shot of, and I wish we had a video of it because it's done shaky cam style. The camera is moving with the footsteps of the camera operator. Normally it's wheeled smoothly on a dolly, or it's just in place and it pivots. But this time it's being carried along by someone who's walking towards the actors down this narrow corridor, the bounds of which we can see.
There's light, shadow, smoke. We can't make out the characters in this scene. You can only see their silhouettes. It's wonderfully tense. It's so out of normal Star Trek cinematography.
It's beautiful. I'll put in my notes. It looks more like something from the first Alien film than it does from Star Trek. It looks like a real place where a real disaster has happened.
Absolutely.
And just so much thought got into it. That there is rubble on the floor, and the camera person is having to step over it as they carry the camera towards the characters. It's risky. It's innovative direction. And they care enough to damn well do it. I love that so much.
I do.
And again, so different from TNG, where you'd have a couple of static cameras at different sides of the room.
And computer-generated sparks, and everybody shaking in their seats to make it look like the Enterprise has been hit. Sorry, I don't always want to dunk on TNG. TNG is a great Star Trek show, but
this is so many steps ahead of it.
I hate to say, but it is. Yeah, it really is.
And I can only assume that that's in part due to the financial investment that's gone into this show as well. They are willing to throw a lot of money at the props, the special effects, the backgrounds. There's a lot of effort put in all over the place. A lot of love has gone into it, and you can really see it in the well-directed bits of this episode, which are not about the fucking pup.
Agreed.
But yes, the camera then pans down. They're in the corridor. The camera pans down, and we see a panel popping out of the wall. Bashir's feet are pushing against it.
Let me bring that up. There it is.
And Sisko then bends down to help Bashir up, asks if he's okay, and then they both bend over to help Madam Ambassador out of the crawl space. She's soot-stained, she's looking a bit ragged, and she asks, "Please, Julian, call me Taxco." And then Sisko asks Vidosia, the Bolian ambassador?
Bolian, yes, that's right.
Sisko asks if he is okay. And I've completely lost my place in the script again.
I think he also says we were fine. We were fine because Dr. Bashir stepped in. And,
he says yes, thanks to Julian.
Yes,
they both refer
that's
to him
Julian. Yes, he calls him Julian.
And then Lojol, the Vulcan ambassador, without any prompting, just pops up and says, "The doctor was remarkably calm and logical for a man of his years under such severe conditions." Dosia says, "We'll be putting him in for a commendation." And Kira kind of looks cynically surprised, just kind of an eyebrow lifted, amazed that this is happening. And Sisko says, "Nice work, Dr. Bashir." Bashir says, "Just in the right place at the right time, sir." And that's the conclusion to the little ambassadorial thing. It all turned out well because he kept his head in a crisis.
I've got to admit, I did actually bump on that. And I said, it's amazing how a disaster overrides all of the ambassador's previous concerns. They're like, forget all of our,
being squashed into a fine tube with everyone suddenly made them friendly.
Yeah, that's fine. All bets are off, all sins forgiven. And I'm like, whoa, hold on, right? Star Trek's always been about going into the Jeffries tubes and hiding out and sneaking around and that. This isn't anything new. And it just felt like such a contrived, way to solve the problem.
You've got to picture these ambassadors. The corridor is on fire. There's more plasma being shot out at them in a few seconds' time. And they're still alive, and they're actually grateful for that.
Fine. Okay.
I think it's not amazing narratively. We don't learn anything new about Bashir by doing that. We don't learn anything important about him that will be carried forward into future episodes. Nope. He thought quickly. It's not based on anything he's done previously.
Nope. It is a C plot. It is a very comfortable C plot. They had one thing to do. They did it. Brill. Okay, fair enough. You know, I
They
wasn't
threw
massively offended.
special effects at it, so I'm
That was
grateful
good.
that we got those scenes in the corridors.
There we go.
For no other reason. That worked nicely.
C plus. C plus.
But yes, we now come back to Odo and Lwaxana leaving the turbo lift. He is now fully back in his usual form, no longer melting, and very nicely, she is just tucking her hair back under her blonde wig as she steps out. Just a really sweet little detail. Odo says, "I know that wasn't exactly what you had in mind for your picnic." And Lwaxana says, "When it comes to picnics, the only thing that really matters is the company." Odo nods and says, "Your sensitivity and discretion are appreciated." Lwaxana puts her hand to his face and says, "Next time you see me, I'll give you a lot more to appreciate." And Odo just smiles gently as he watches her walk off camera. There isn't any implication that he's looking at her butt. He's just watching her leave.
Yes.
Back in ops, Sisko is leaving the turbo lift. He asks, "How did you beat that thing in the computer, Chief?" And O'Brien says, "I didn't." Dax says, "He adopted it." And O'Brien says, "I was able to get our friend out of the main command pathways and into a sub-program." Sisko asks if he's just leaving it there. O'Brien says, "It's happy. It's not bothering us. It seems the humane thing to do." And Dax says, "It's just another new life form visiting the station." O'Brien says, "I'll take care of it. Make sure it gets enough attention and all." And Sisko says, "Keep it off the furniture." O'Brien says, "Yes, sir." And that's where the episode ends, with this alien subroutine running all of the backup through it.
It's crazy. I know that occasionally weaker episodes of DS9 Season 1 like to end on that gag. You know, Sisko goes, "Keep it off the furniture," like it's a...
summarily executed someone!
Right, that's exactly it. It's exactly the same vein, you know. And we're all... This program can override any part of the station's programming. You know, it blew up a corridor. It nearly killed 4 people. It turns the lights off. And that's all it could do then, you know. Now it's had longer.
Forgets to give it attention for a few seconds. It could kill a lot of us.
The only thing that saves them is Star Trek's inability to carry plots forward. That's the only thing, because I'm sure I'm not going to spoil anything, and that this never comes up again.
Seriously.
Never.
They introduced a whole alien program into the shipboard computer, and that's never going to come up again. So there wasn't any reason for that plot to exist, and for it to be so shoddy and hastily shoved in, and the whole thing with it being a puppy. Oh my God, I'm angry now.
I'm really sorry. Honestly, I feel like they worked backwards from, how do we get these 2 people trapped in a corridor? Something happens to the station. All right, what? Something happens to the computer. All right, what? Alien virus? It's been done. Can we make it a bit more different?
We've already mentioned a dog and a cat. Can we somehow have an analogy for it?
Why don't we do that? And they're like, yeah, all right then. And they just knock this off. Safe in the knowledge that they'll never have to revisit again, because when you write for Star Trek, every episode is a bottle episode. Nothing ever affects the episodes that follow it.
And everyone's attention is on the turbo lift, which it was. I couldn't have told you what that subplot was about after the first time I watched this episode. It just held zero interest for me, none whatsoever. It's got nothing special about it.
Yep.
There's no. It's got the nice little visual of the little tubes with an R of putting the little things in. That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's right. And the probe prop we said looked nice. You know, even though they never mentioned that again either. It's just floating around outside the station, I guess, ignored, getting in the way of people.
I feel really sorry for the props people. They've put all of this effort and energy and beautiful work into these sorry-ass secondary plot lines. Oh.
So at this point, I would usually ask you, you know, how do you feel you've differed from the intro to the episode, when we usually kind of share our feelings? You're angry. Okay. I must admit, I am more disappointed in this episode than when I went in. I thought it was all right with a few letdowns. Now that we've analysed it to bits, it's rubbish. Well, it's not rubbish. It has some really glaring flaws.
Oh, the indoor cat says they called it a puppy on a whim.
And it became like the plank of the episode, this whim. That's a really good point.
But yeah, and I thought the thing I was going to be most angry about in this episode was the Lwaxana harassment scene. But while it's still inappropriate to play that for laughs, and they needed to tone it very differently, I still feel more annoyed about the puppy.
Yeah. That was like a reflection of values. It was an interpretation of comedy that was very indicative of the time, and we now frown and do not condone. but bad writing, like bad plotting, bad
Puppy is never going to be okay.
motivations. You know, that's unforgivable. That is unforgivable whenever it's created. You know, I would apply the same to Shakespearean writing all the way to, you know, 24th century Vulcan love poetry. You know, if it's badly written, it's badly written. It doesn't matter where, when, what the context is. And I think we can just agree that this was just really, really strung together. It's when they are inevitably writing, they've written back from a conclusion to a genesis. That's when they are really at their worst.
I'm betting the puppy thing started with the line about keeping it off the furniture, and they worked back from.
I think you're bob on with that. Yeah, they had a gag and they wrote back from that, and we just have this really, really uneven plot that just doesn't do anyone justice.
And also, just Sisko. What the hell, Sisko?
And
what were you doing this episode? What are you here for? What is your motivation, man?
Again,
because it seems to be lie around the office doing nothing in particular, waiting for your staff to sort themselves out instead of intervening meaningfully where you really could and should.
It should have gone with the situations start happening. Sisko takes effort to stop them, and so something else happens. In reality, him not doing anything allows the plot to run down these rails that I think the script has had.
And I just, as I said earlier, they could have had him want to intervene and be prevented by the many technical errors that are occurring around the station.
Yeah.
It didn't need to be this useless.
It
could have genuinely tried and been properly stymied by the very real problems.
I don't believe that.
It's weird. So weird.
All they wanted things to happen their way rather than how things would have actually happened within the confines of this universe, where Sisko would have absolutely gone, that's not right, do this, do that, sort it out.
See, I really love this phenomenon. I love the phenomenon whereby the writers do not have the final say over what is right for a character to do. We can watch this, and having watched the previous episodes, we instinctively feel that this is out of character. Even though we didn't write it, we didn't create the characters, and we didn't have the say over who those characters are. But still, fandoms develop such really strong feelings about who a character is, and writers can betray that. Yeah. I just find it a really fascinating phenomenon, because in theory we have no right to do that whatsoever. We weren't involved in the creative process, but we can and we do, and fandoms consistently do this. It comes up that writers make mistakes, do characters dirty. Yeah. And in this episode, Sisko was not written as Sisko for my money.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think, I know a lot of shows kind of try not to engage with the fandom too much and try and get, write it almost in a bubble and not be steered by fans. But I don't think that always works out. I think Star Trek's fandom can be great and a great resource, and can really kind of pick up on stuff that the renter writers who are just in to write one episode just will miss. So I think, we have a legitimate complaint to make here. You will take us seriously, show that was made 30 years ago. You will take our complaints on board.
This is not my Sisko.
This is not my Sisko. My Sisko would never. Wow. Okay. So we are now at 2 hours 45 minutes. So I'm very keen to let everyone get on with their lives. Great bits, beautiful bits in an otherwise sea of disappointing writing. We've had a couple of these now. I mean, would you say it's on a par with Vortex?
I prefer it to Vortex, definitely, just because it's more interesting. More of it hangs together better, I think. And in terms of both of them are Odo episodes, this is a good, strong Odo episode. This is what you want to see from Odo's background. Not vague hinting from someone who's probably lying and turns out to be lying all the way through the episode. Proper, solid, this is what my life was like. Love it. Love to see it.
I'm very, very pleased to hear you say so. Great. Okay, still not discouraged from pressing on to the next one?
Oh gosh, no! I'm still kind of holding myself back, because we're nearly at the end of season 1 now, and in season 2 there's Garak. Garak is waiting on the other side of that divide, and I have to get to him, Tim.
I know. That's why I am trying so hard not to have any delay. So we will be back in a couple of Mondays' time with Dramatis Personae, which is season 1, episode 18. So those of you watching along with us, please check it out and come back and join us. I shall put this on YouTube as swiftly as possible.
Thank you everyone who's stuck with us for this long during a very long explanation of a 40-odd minute episode. We really value your being here with us, and thank you so much, the Indoor Cat, for your expertise, your input, your research, for keeping the chat flowing. Yeah, we couldn't do it without you, Pep.
We could not. It's greatly appreciated. We hope everyone will return again in a couple of weeks' time for the next episode. So, Kat, as always, thank you very much for your contributions, and thank you everyone for watching. And we shall see everyone in a couple of weeks' time. Take care, live long and prosper.
See you then.
Good night.